And welcome to Brant County Council special meeting for June the 10th.
Okay.
June the 10th. First thing on the agenda is we're going to take attendance. I'm going to call your names and please just answer that you're with us tonight. Councillor Wheat.
Yes.
Councillor Calpine.
Yes.
Councillor LaFerriere.
Here.
Councillor Howe.
Here.
Councillor Bell.
Okay.
With us.
Councillor Pierce.
Oh, fucking terrible.
Here.
As I said, double bogey.
Councillor Chambers.
I'm right here.
Councillor Miller.
Present.
Councillor Coleman.
Here.
And Councillor Gatward.
Present.
Thank you. Before we move on to the agenda, I just want to say a couple of things. When I go to other meetings like SWIFT and SCORE and the wardens, the Western Ontario Wardens Association, I always speak very highly of our council, and I explain to them that we have 11 very unique people sitting around our horseshoe. And I have the highest respect, all of you. And turning things back to Tuesday evening, I feel that people watching Tuesday evening's meeting wouldn't have known that Councillor LaFerriere and I are good friends and have been for a lot of years. I feel like I can't ask you people to behave properly. When I found myself not behaving myself, when looking back, I was very disappointed in how I spoke. No one's asked me tonight. I just want to sleep better tonight than I did last night. So, Councillor LaFerriere, I'm sorry if I obviously startled you. When I look back, you looked very surprised that someone who was a friend would speak to you the way I did. So that's all I have to say about that.
Well, thank you, and completely accepted and completely taken at face value and appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Mark. Second thing is the approval of the agenda, please, with the addendums. Looking for someone. Councillor Pierce, looking for a seconder. Got Councillor Bell. Any other items to add to the agenda, knowing that there's one more piece of correspondence, 4.3.6, which is a letter from 4 builders with concerns about timelines for servicing in the St. Georgian area. I hope everyone received it, but other than that, everything else should be on your agenda. Any questions? All those in favor? Opposed and carried. Thank you. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest that you know of right now? Seeing none, if you have some later or find yourself in a pickle, please put your hand up and let me know. At this point, we'll declare the public meeting open, and I'll call on Jennifer Boyer to begin the presentation, please. 4.1.
Good evening, everyone. And thank you, Mayor Bailey and members of council for attending tonight. We really appreciate your time and effort dedicated to the county's new official plan. I believe before I start, I think Pam Dusling, our general manager, wanted to say just a few words of introduction before I begin the staff presentation. So if I can call on Pam, if she's available, just to say a few words of introduction.
Perfect. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thanks very much, Jennifer. I just wanted to I guess, identify the seriousness of this evening's meeting. The official plan is the most important planning document that the County of Brant has, which directs future development. And as we all know, good policy equals great development. So we're very much looking forward to tonight, some of the decisions that Council is going to make that will help us as a team forward the official plan review. And I would very much like to thank Brandon, Jessica, Michelle, and especially Jennifer for all their work to date on the official plan review process. This is a large process, and there has been a lot of behind the scenes work, a lot of one-on-one calls with many developers and members of the public. And that team has just taken so much time and dedication to getting the document at this point. And over the next few months, they will be very hardworking on all of the writing of the policies to come. So Jennifer and your team, thank you very much. And I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Pam.
All right, thank you very much, Pam, for those words of introduction. It's much appreciated. And I have to say a big thank you to our team as well. So I have my staff here available as well. As Pam said, we have Michelle Schafel, our environmental planner, Jessica Kitchen, and Brandon Courtleave, who is our policy planners, who we've slugged many hours in the last few weeks putting this together for you. We also have members of senior management available as well tonight, and we'll be happy to answer a lot of questions. Matt Vaughn's here for a while, Director of Development Planning. We also have Russ Press and Rob Walton, our GM of Operations. So we'd be happy to answer any questions you have on any of the subject matter. So tonight is just me. There's no Watson tonight, so we'll be leading through a presentation, and I promised a short presentation, so hopefully I can get through this in about 20 or so minutes. And I believe then staff will be answering some questions. And we do have quite a few delegations tonight who will be presenting their viewpoints on our preliminary policy directions, which we'll work through. There's quite a few additional pieces of correspondence that you've received as well. Some people decided that they didn't want to be a delegation in person, so I hope that you'd be able to read the correspondence as well on their behalf. But I have spoken to everyone as well if they've just submitted a letter. So thank you very much. So next slide. So I guess why are we here tonight? If you can't believe it's already been 7 weeks since we had our employment lands needs discussion on April 22nd. I can't believe how fast the time goes, even during a lockdown. But why are we here tonight? We're really taking a bit of a stepping stone before we get to the draft OP. And I had to apologize for the amount of information that's in the package tonight. If you can imagine what we work on every day, you're really getting a snapshot of some of the information that we work with every day. And it's trying to give you a summary of some of the things up to this date. And it's really tonight about telling a story of how we got here, really about the council feedback we've had from you, the story we've heard loud and clear from our community members, our stakeholders, also our Indigenous communities, which we'll talk about as well tonight, also our development industry, and all of members of the public who daily we get lots of emails and phone calls on the OP. And really it's about feedback, because this is a milestone. This is actually a public meeting under Section 26 of the Planning Act, and it's really about Council's direction to staff tonight for us to prepare the draft official plan, which is underway. And we're presenting these preliminary policy directions, even though we are making some pretty high-arching statements tonight. But these are some of the directions after the last year and a half of how we're moving forward in terms of preparing the draft municipal comprehensive review, and really the next steps for engagement and consultation. And I want to reiterate tonight that tonight is really just about information and direction. There are no recommendations or conclusions that we're coming to. We're still in the process of preparing all draft materials. However, we have to get to a point tonight in terms of moving forward to preparing the draft OP. The biggest thing in terms of why we're here is that we really want to have a new official plan that's not appealable at LPAT. And you'll see one of the letters attached to the correspondence tonight from the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and the Ontario Growth Secretariat. It was actually on one of the council agendas last month, but Heather and I included it tonight just to reiterate, if you look at the fourth paragraph on that letter, that it says there's absolutely no extensions to the official plan timeline in terms of the ministry's sort of review process. So we have to keep to our timeframes, and I think that's one of the most important things for tonight. And I think really we're looking at that this is really feedback from the community. We've actually given COVID, we've done a lot of community outreach and also the feedback from members, whether there be rural or in Paris or St. George or all of our settlement areas. And it's really sort of giving us some guidance about how to move forward. So next slide. So just to align you to our strategic plan of the county, if you go back to 2019 before we even started the OP, just to tell the story of where we are, the number one, of course, strategic priority for council of your term is sustainable and managed growth. And you'll see at the bottom left of this slide is the new official plan and the municipal comprehensive review, and also our secondary plans that we'll be preparing embedded in the OP. This is the number one strategic priority for council. And we are moving ahead on that. This is our number one priority. But you can also see how many of these things align together as the key strategic priorities of the county, including the economic resilience. At the bottom, our employment land needs assessment, our reliable infrastructure. So that's how we built upon the themes that we moved forward with the OP. Next slide. And as we move forward, we do not stop engaging. In fact, next week, I think you've seen the invite for our public town hall. So just like back in October, we're going to have another virtual town hall session with our facilitator, Glenn. So we're looking forward to that. So this is then the public version of tonight's session to garner even more feedback on how we're proceeding with the draft OP. So you're all welcome to attend. And we have quite a few people registered, which is very good, and we're looking forward to that. But I guess the impetus is that we are still in the draft stage, and we're also garnering feedback as we move forward. So look forward to that. Next slide. So just to align you, even though I come to you every about 6 weeks or so, or every month, just to put you into where we are in our process, as we call it, the rocket ship graphic of where we are. Well, we're just right smack dab in the middle of our proposed policy directions, but moving forward quite rapidly. So we're basically like moving ahead, and the draft OP is the next stage. Even though we ended up getting stuck on phase 2 for almost a year and got delayed about 6 months with COVID last spring, but I think that our time frame is quite good, and we've received quite a good feedback from the province and also all our stakeholders about our time frame, so they're quite pleased. So next slide. So just to align you with what's happened so far, because I think every time I come to you, it's trying to figure out how it all fits into the process. In April, it was about employment land needs. Actually, it was March 2nd, we did the residential land needs, and all the way back in December was the growth management forecasting. And then some little reports in between about updates. So I can't believe it was already November 2019, which we did the launch. And we basically created then these policy topics or buckets. Then we actually just started to introduce the new OP process, and then just throughout last year, it was really about dealing with COVID, starting engagement and consultation, working on the draft municipal comprehensive review, and just looking at sort of more of the background technical analysis. Next slide. And I guess last fall is really when we started a lot of our virtual consultation, which was really a big new thing during COVID. How would we do that? But I think it went quite well given the sort of limitations we had. But really it's sort of like there's been so much going on in the background, and it's really to tell council all the little things that we've been doing along the way. And then we did basically those sessions, and if you remember, last December, it was about the growth forecasting, and then all the things the province changed about the growth plan itself in terms of the new planning horizon to 2051, which was a big change. And then in March, we presented our phase 2 engagement summary. Brandon had a really comprehensive report of everything we'd heard so far from the public and our stakeholders. Next slide. So where are we now, and why are we here tonight again? And really it's about, like I said, it's a stepping stone to the next process. It's to summarize everything for you and give you some preliminary direction before we move ahead. And I guess in reality, we didn't have to come tonight, but I think in the era of being transparent and also to have, you know, the development community, you'll hear from them tonight with delegations in terms of our policy directions, but give you a summary of our major pieces of the municipal comprehensive review. And so that's basically before we get to July 29th. July 29th will be the draft OP. And basically up until then, that's going to be a draft version. And we'll seek sort of endorsement then to go bring that to the province for a 90-day one-window review. And it's still all draft. And we'll launch into statutory public consultation for 3 months leading up into the fall. Next slide. So really, when you think about our goals and objectives of the official plan, you know, this is what we've sort of put together over the last year and a half. It's really about taking a official plan that's really dated approval for 2012, but it's a 2010 plan. We have a 10-year-old official plan that is, you know, in a way 6 years late, and it's 2 growth plan versions and 2 PPS versions out of date already. So it's trying to clear up a lot of the legislative context and the things we can do, we must do, and the things that we have flexibility on. And these are some of the things I've presented a lot of times before, but just to recap some of the things, and I've heard from the development community just about how we want to manage growth in the county in terms of staging it, phasing it, and also development plans. And also coordinating our land uses with our infrastructure planning and needs, whether that be hard servicing like water and sewer or transportation, and how we allocate growth and support the opportunities for either intensification or the density requirements for new developments. One of the things the growth plan has to, as we must do, is complete communities. And it's not just focused on urban centers like Paris and St. George, but also rural clusters as well in our hamlets and villages. And really we're looking at a brand new land use system, which we laid out in the preliminary policy directions. As we say in our OP, we've got too many colors of the rainbow in land use designations, and we're trying to consolidate everything just to make it a lot more clear. And that includes, you know, everything from different mixed uses to open space, different designations in terms of how we're dealing with the agricultural system, which we'll get into, our natural heritage system. So actually all of the things for tonight, we actually haven't talked about. Our natural heritage system, agriculture policies, that's been a bit silent over the last little while, but it does have a big focus tonight. And those are pieces that we can't forget. And there's a lot in the documents about how we want to move forward in that respect as well. So next slide. So we've got some sort of pretty big changes to our current OP in terms of the new version coming up. Obviously, we have to conform to the growth plan. So number one thing the province is going to look at when we actually submit it to them. That will include a growth management plan and strategy. The county's not had a comprehensive growth management strategy, and that's obviously the number one strategic priority that we must come up with. I've had the phasing of development plan, and as mentioned, you'll see a letter from the St. George Landowners Group that some of the developers have concerns about how we want to phase the development over time in terms of how we're going to allocate building permits and servicing, how the county is going to do that over time, what's in the pipeline, and what's proposed. As I've mentioned, we've got a new land use planning framework coming up in terms of different designations, and also the clarity of the hierarchy of settlement areas. The growth plan really just says there's urban or rural settlement areas where we've got a big sort of mix of them, and we're trying to clean up that in terms of Paris being sort of our urban settlement areas with St. George, and then we're looking at some secondary settlement areas like Keensville, Mount Pleasant, Oak Hill Airport, and Burford, and then our rural settlement areas. As mentioned on April 22nd with employment lands, we're looking at an additional employment land reserve and potential shortfall of over 103 hectares or more, and what to do with those employment lands and where are we going to put our shortfall. We're doing a lot of mapping exercises in the background to clean up our mapping systems, especially for agricultural and natural systems. And we're looking at different sort of land use designations because there's too many designations that are in the rural area outside of prime ag, which we'll get into a bit more detail. We're looking at different things like rural hamlets where rural residential clusters are, and also, different uses outside of prime ag and rural lands. And there's a lot of land out in the agricultural area and some villages it's zoned ag, but in residential areas, and how we're going to deal with that in the future. So some sort of holding. We're also looking at open space, everything from our trailer parks to our golf courses to conservation areas. How do we sort of group those together in some sort of open space? And another big component of our new OP is going to talk about Indigenous engagement and reconciliation. You can see in the report and also in the preliminary policy documents that we've had some very good consultation with our community members at Six Nations of the Grand River and Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, which has correspondence attached to this report tonight. And they've been wonderful to talk to. And I think that it's very important that we work on the spirit of reconciliation, especially the call to action items that are directed to municipalities in the Truth and Reconciliation documents, and also partnering with them in terms of their needs and the issues that they face as communities. So next slide. So in the report, I sort of outline what are preliminary policy directions, like why are we here tonight? And really, we're looking at sort of, as I said before, really what the county must do in terms of provincial direction. What you see tonight is sort of a summary of everything that we've been to so far. And it's looking at, the provincial policy statement, the growth plan, and really what Watson's working on in the background, which is, which you see the table of contents attached. That's just the draft table of contents. But, all the residential land needs in the discussion from March with our employment land needs, and everything sort of put together and what kind of strategic directions we're going ahead. Really, the analysis that's specific to the county, it's really based on a lot of feedback and engagement as well. I can't reiterate the fact that we keep hearing from the community and what they want this plan to be, and in terms of managing growth, and also just some of the other issues, because we've attached a lot of information about transportation, also in terms of the services that the county can provide, community, things like, walking and biking, active transportation. There's just a lot of things that's come up in terms of making this a great place to work, live, and play, as they say. Next slide. So now we're going to get into just a bit of meat in terms of some preliminary policy directions. So I think before we go ahead, really we're looking at some of the big statements that have come up so far. So what's in the report and what's in the preliminary policy directions and how we're moving forward are really some just big statements in terms of the directions. We're looking at messaging these out to yourselves and to the community about what we've heard so far in our draft land needs assessment. We can conclude some things right now. We're at that point. And I think now, in terms of keeping on schedule, it's looking for yourselves at council to look at some of these statements to say that, yes, this is the direction we want to go in, or no, actually, staff, I would like to see some changes to this, or I have questions. But really, it's about looking at how we're going to deal with this growth management strategy our tools and looking at our complete communities framework, and how we're actually going to track this over time. And those are number one things with growth management that we're looking at. But I think some of the biggest statements before we get into the points about growth management is that the things that we've heard loud and clear with our land needs assessment is really the community, yourselves, and also our technical analysis, and even talking to our development industry, is we don't want to over designate land. I mean, those are the points that are on about settlement area boundary expansions, about residential. If you think back to March, when Watson presented all the information on residential land needs, we have a surplus of residential lands in our urban areas. So what does that mean in terms of our policy directions? It means really about no new residential growth in those areas, over designation of land, and we have excess lands. So what are we going to do with them? So these are some of the things that we can conclude as well. And then going to our employment lands, we have a shortfall. So that was on April's presentation. We have a shortfall of employment lands in our urban centers. And we also have rural lands in our secondary settlement areas or rural land communities. But, what do we do with those? What do we do with the shortfall? Where do we put it? What makes sense for the county in terms of their strategic direction? Where do you want to see growth in terms of employment? So we have to have jobs. And then in terms of the employment land conversion requests that are in, if we want to keep our employment lands, then we've put in a statement, because we're done the analysis and we're about to present, and we've made the statement that we are not supporting employment land conversions. So you will hear from delegations who will say that they would like their applications for conversion, but we are making that statement tonight that the county as staff, we are not recommending the employment land conversions, and we'll be prepared to give all this information to you in the coming months, basically with the draft OP. So next slide. So just a quick recap on some of the things that I just said in terms of the residential land needs. If you look back to the forecasting, we seem to be moving ahead, and this is the Schedule 3 forecast, which is the sort of minimum. So a total population of the county of 59,000 and employment of 26,000 people to the planning horizon. And if you just remember in terms of August of the 2020, that when the growth plan was amended, they added the 10 years. So we don't have it to 2041, we now have it to 2051. So that's 30 years, not the original 20 when the population. So I guess the messaging is that we now don't have 20 years, and we're not looking at all the population in the next 5 years, even though there's a lot of development. This is a forecast for 30 years, and that's one of the major things that change with the growth plan. What we concluded too in terms of our residential land needs back in March, which has not changed, is that we do have sufficient greenfield area development and we have a surplus. And that's that 395 hectares that we talked about, and it's to be declared excess lands. So one of the things, we had a meeting with the province at the Ontario Growth Secretariat to say, what is your excess land policy and what are we supposed to do? So we are one of the only municipalities in the entire Greater Golden Horseshoe that has excess residential lands. So I think that's a big thing. And so they are looking to us to find a policy tool to what to do with it in terms of either declaring it non-developable to the 2051 horizon and potentially sterilizing them. But I have some conversations with a couple councillors, and actually Councillor Bell asked, well, can you swap lands? Can you down designate? Can you change them? So the province says, no, you can't swap around lands. That's one of the number one things you cannot do. There is the potential for down designating, but I'm not sure. That's probably something the council does not want to do, but you can actually declare them excess and sterilize them. But those are things that we'll be bringing forward with the draft OP. So in terms of growth management as well, I've already talked about how the strategy is going to be laid out, and we will be working with yourselves and the community and also the development industry, of course, to develop these tools. So next slide. So a couple of points. I've had a couple of emails and calls, obviously, and some of the delegations will be talking about the first point, because it says, as noted in the staff report, you can see the list of the actual settlement area boundary expansions that we have. On April 22nd, with employment lands, we had several slides that showed you the visual graphics of which areas were wanting expansions outside of the settlement area boundaries, and which ones would want conversions. There's also a few more, and you'll hear a delegation from Mr. Stewart tonight for Oak Hill, because Oak Hill's come up as well. But basically, the report talks about all the different settlement area boundary expansion requests that we have in. Tonight was not about reviewing every single one of these requests. It's to give you an indication of how we're moving forward. Each of them is a pretty big matrix of all the evaluation criteria the province wants, from an agricultural impact assessment, natural heritage review. We've got hydrologic influence. We have to look at the needs analysis. There's quite a few criteria that we have to go through, and we're at a point now that at least we can state where we're at. And that information, of course, is going to be available. And it will be available for, in fact, we're meeting with all the delegates and who've provided that information. And as I've noted in report, that some of the information we received was either planning consulting reviews, or some of them were letters. You see a letter attached as well. Tonight, it was from Oak Hill, and Wilbert Long has attached his letter that he submitted for his settlement area boundary expansion review in Oak Hill, if you had a chance to read that. So I just wanted to make that point that staff, even though we've made these statements tonight, we've come to a point where at least we can make some conclusions on that information. So. And that's why the third point, in terms of the settlement area boundary expansion, we are not recommending settlement area boundary expansions for certain areas based on the provincial policy statement and infrastructure servicing constraints in those areas. But it's open to discussion, and that's why there's some delegations tonight. So obviously, we're looking at expansion options at the Paris 403 Business Park. We noted that in April. And that's where we're looking at putting the shortfall of our employment lands. And obviously, as I talked about, we're evaluating all that information. Next slide. So in March, we talked about the whole intensification target, and the recommendations did not go through that night. It was based on more consultation and feedback and our municipal comprehensive review. So we still are recommending, and we're making the statement about a minor increase to the intensification target in the built-up area for Paris and St. George. In Paris, it's already being met, and it just allows for some different housing options, such as, conversions and infill development. We've got some coming in for St. George that are interesting. In fact, the affordable housing was actually one of those projects that would have met the intensification definition for St. George. So, and there's been a lot of talk about the minimum density requirement. In March, we talked about the upping it from 40 residents and jobs per hectare to 50, and what does that mean? So we said, okay, well, let's step back, come back with some more information. We've provided some information for council and also to the public. We've talked to a lot of the development industry, how they want to proceed with that. There's an attachment tonight about visualizing density, and Brandon actually made that. I thought it was quite good, and we'd be happy to answer more questions about what does that mean, and we'll have a lot more information for the public next week as well, why we think that it should go up to 50. But really, one of the biggest things is, I think, the beginning of the presentation on April 22nd, the Watson Jamie presented the difference between if we used 40 to 50. And if we keep it at 40 residents and jobs per hectare, we have about 300 hectares of excess lands. If we move it to 50, we have 395 hectares of excess lands. And it's 95 hectares, which is a lot of land, and that is the difference. It's actually one of our growth management tools. And I just wanted to reiterate that that's one of the things that we do have in our toolbox to manage and slow growth is the actual increasing of the density target. One of the other things we're looking at is our attainable and affordable housing options, and we talked about that in the report and policy directions. We really need some different housing choices in the county. We have sort of a rental issue in terms of availability, and we have a aging population. The biggest thing is our age groups are getting older, and they need smaller homes and they need affordable homes, because we do have a lot of people still on fixed incomes, even though you may not see it out there. There are people on fixed incomes, and it's getting very tough to find affordable and attainable housing options as people age in place as they will. And a lot of the community members, as you know, if you live in the county, they want to stay. They don't want to move. They want to stay. And I hear from a lot of families who call me about mom or dad or grandma or grandpa about, I'd really like them to stay, but I don't know what to do. And if we had some different housing options for them, I think that we could answer some of those questions a bit more readily. So that's one of the things that is really a main piece of our new OP. Next slide. So as I mentioned, and we'd be happy to answer questions on this. This is just a snapshot of the visual that Brandon put into our package tonight. It's a glossy on the actual density target that we're recommending, up to 50 residents and jobs per hectare. And he put an example in of the south end of Paris, actually, where he actually lives. And I will be a new resident in a week. So it's actually a pretty amazing visual about, it's actually 52 people and jobs per hectare. And he went around and took some amazing photos of the different housing types that you can see that's attached to the glossy. And it just talks a lot about the different type of built form, especially in some of our older areas, and what that actually looks like. And it's funny how they did that 100 or 150 years ago, but we seem to have lost that. Because that's the way they used to build communities. They used to have a main street with shops. They used to have smaller and denser neighborhoods for walkability because people didn't have cars. They also had people that couldn't afford large homes because you had a very large working class population in terms of income. And also a lot of parents and grandpas, they lived together. So in terms of the actual amount of people who lived in a house. So it was fascinating to do this exercise, and as I said, we'd be happy to talk about it. Next slide. So just recapping on our employment land needs, back in April, some of the preliminary policy directions, and we were getting to a point in April where we could make some pretty steadfast conclusions just about the types of employment lands, our shortfall, the actual designations, and where we should put our priority areas in terms of prestige. And also there was a debate about rural and also the classification of our settlement areas, like what is Keensville has always been the misnomer of what it can be classified as in terms of the lack of servicing. And because in our current official plan, it lists as primary urban settlement area, but it's not, it's actually a secondary without a built boundary. And you know, the couple of the delegates will talk about that tonight. But in terms of our employment lands, we've got quite a big package coming with our draft municipal review. So this is a bit more fresh in your minds, I think, in terms of April, in terms of the preliminary policy direction. So next slide. So one of the statements we've made, and we have met with some of the delegates tonight, and we spent a lot of time meeting over the last year, reviewing some of the conversion requests that we've received, and we are in a lot of contact. But I think one of the things that we've recommended, though, based on our shortfall, is that, and we've also heard strong, very clear words from council and also the community, is we are not recommending the employment land conversions from employment to residential. So you'll hear from some delegates tonight who disagree with that statement. But that's one of the major statements tonight that we're making, that the county staff and their technical analysis is not recommending further residential lands and taking away our employment lands in these areas. So even without the conversions, we have the shortfall. So the 103 gross hectares, I say minimum because we are working on the actual number, because Project Evergreen and those big projects, they have taken some lands out of our inventory just in the last few weeks. So that number will be refined. And the next point is that we've had a lot of comments about our employment density target of 15 employees per hectare. Why is it so low? Can it be upped? So we've heard that actually from quite a few people. The one issue, though, is the types of employment and the types of facilities that are being built, the large-scale facilities, and can we meet the target of 15 employees per hectare? It hasn't been met in certain areas, so I think that, I know Watson is recommending that we keep it that way, but we have had concern about that we should be upping it and attracting different types of businesses that create more jobs than just 15 employees per hectare. So that's something that I think will be discussed tonight. We also talked in April about creating a future strategic employment land reserve for additional lands beyond our need because of the market and the needs that may come up in the future. And that was fairly supported. So next slide. So now we're going to get into just quickly some of the other directions that are in the policy documents that we can't forget, besides our big ticket items like growth and employment and residential land needs. But basically the next few slides are building on the themes of the pillars that we went through last fall with all our consultation. This is our building healthy and complete communities, which we actually heard the most feedback from all the community members, rural or urban, more than growth management. It was building healthy and complete communities. This was the #1 topic, near and dear to people's hearts, which actually surprised us. It did and it didn't, but I think really it was the breadth of topics that people were interested in. They really felt that they needed to be appropriately serviced. They wanted active transportation. They want, certain housing choices, even though most people would prefer single detached, but they also agree that they need places about income level and age structure, and also dealing with the affordability issue. And a lot of people really want convenient, walkable neighborhoods. Whether you live in a village or hamlet, live in the country, you need amenities, but also in our larger centers like Paris and St. George. And it was to bring back the corner store concept, as they called it. When you went down to the corner store as a kid, you had that option. And I think that again is to bring that option back, and people really felt that was part of the community building they wanted to see. Next slide. So one of the things we haven't talked about but comes up a lot is what do we do about protecting what we value, which is really focused a lot on our agricultural system. A lot of stuff has come up about protection about our agricultural system, and the province actually has extremely strict and strong rules about our agricultural system, our agri-food network, our agri-system, getting goods to market, protecting farmland. So in terms of the growth plan, we really have to redo our agricultural system mapping. And I can say that the colleagues at the province at OMAFRA have been fabulous to work with. They've been great providing us mapping, so we're redoing all that, and limiting uses and farm practices. And we're really looking at avoiding further fragmentation of the agricultural system. Our agricultural system is becoming more and more fragmented. There's still a lot of severances going on, surplus farm dwellings, rural residential lot development. So I think that we need to address this over the plan horizon of 30 years, because the fragmentation is becoming quite apparent when we do the mapping. So we do need clear direction, and in terms of our natural heritage system, the same thing. Michelle's been working on mapping with our GIS, and we also have to update our plans to be consistent with our source protection plan as well. So I'm working with the Conservation Authority, Grand River Conservation, to get that in conformity. Next slide. So some other bits about protecting what we value. As I mentioned, our Indigenous communities will be building in some of those policies into our framework in terms of cultural heritage, archaeology, also their concerns about water resources. Their drinking water is out of the Grand River. It's very important to them. And also in terms of the environment, and also their concerns about growth as well. They each have their own concerns. The Mississauga and the Six Nations are very different people. They also have the treaty concerns, which is ongoing, as you know. But we are in contact with them, and they don't want to review a lot of paper, but they do want to have an engaging conversation with us as well. And we actually have a meeting with them tomorrow morning as well for about archaeology. So. Also, a big thing about cultural heritage has come up, and that's been a big thing about, especially downtown Paris lately, protecting heritage resources, and we'll have new tools engaged in the new OP about heritage conservation districts and how we can protect our heritage values. Also about public art and things like that, and it's really about also the public participation system and marginalized groups and how we can actually get everyone engaged. And things like that. And also we're working on an archaeological management plan that we're hoping to undertake in the remainder of the year. Next slide. So how we green, we're looking at the special policy area. You're going to see a letter from one of the delegations, Pine Vest Homes, about the Grand River Street proposed development and their concerns about the special policy area. We are in contact with the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry, and we are in review process to look at our policies, just modernize them to get it up to conformity with the provincial policy statement. So we're looking at different things like public open space in terms of our natural heritage and linkages, protecting them, and trail network, and also in terms of green communities. And watershed management is also a big thing, and sub-watershed planning will be integrating. Next slide. So transportation and mobility, the biggest thing is you're going to see attachment to the report about the transportation master plan. And I thought I'd put that on the schedule just to create more paper, but to let you know that we're integrating and we're working together to make sure that the transportation master plan and the OP sync up. And the new transportation schedules will be in the draft OP. And transportation, mobility, integrated transportation, the traffic issues and parking, the TMP will address a lot of those things. But we're looking at sort of the connection issues between the OP and how you plan communities and active transportation for the new official plan. Next slide. So I guess planning for infrastructure, even though these are very high level statements, there's a lot more in the document to look at in terms of some more detail. And this is very high level. There's more coming with the draft OP. But really we're looking at, in terms of the new official plan, reviewing infrastructure capacity and delivery in terms of water and wastewater, and also improving our green infrastructure, which we do. And also it's about innovative stormwater management solutions. But But I think really we're looking at policies that address like the servicing and water capacity allocation issue that's come up. We're syncing also with the county's master servicing plans. We've got Burford underway, Cairnsville, St. George, Paris is done, making sure that the OP is aligning with all these master plans. Next slide. So just the last slide, economic development and prosperity. We've had some really good feedback about ECDEV and also our colleagues at the county in economic development and strategic services. It's not just about employment lands here. This is actually just about the enhancement of actually our downtown core areas, making it vibrant, also the creation of jobs, but also looking at the growth of a more diversified economy over time. Also, the biggest thing here is in the policy document, you'll see a lot of policy directions on rural employment lands and also how we can actually support the immediate needs of existing businesses and also the compatibility. And also a big thing is about agriculture. Agriculture is the #1 economy of the county, and we have to support the agri-food network and also the agriculture related industrial commercial uses and how the compatibility works. So there's a lot in the policy directions document on this with more detail. So next slide. So I guess that's a wrap of the actual policy directions. I think what comes next is when you see the draft OP, you'll look at a lot of the settlement area boundary expansion conversion requests. We're providing more detail. We're working for the draft municipal comprehensive review. We'll also have a growth management strategy with the draft OP in July. We're doing additional consultation as we move forward. Of course, we're always consulting. And also an as we heard it phase 3 engagement summary we'll be providing. So the next big meeting, you won't see us for a while, but it'll come very fast, is the July 29th draft OP. We'll be pulling this all together and you'll be actually making some recommendations as we move it forward as best as we can. So next slide. So just another sales pitch about next week. So we've got the town hall. You've got the invite, and if you are able to send it out to your constituents or let them know, we've done a media blast, and we're also doing a big mail out coming next week on the preliminary policy directions. So all people in the entire county will get that mail out as well. So that's the end of the presentation. I think that we will be taking some questions for a while, but I believe Mayor Bailey, before we move on to delegations.
Yeah, there's an opportunity now for council to ask questions, knowing that there is an agenda item of 4.4, which also opens it up to questions. Councillor, how is your first, please?
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Jennifer, who I can't see anymore. Oh, there she is. Thanks. First of all, thanks for all the work you're putting into this. This is such an important topic, and it's so informative. The conversations that it generates are so helpful to us. I really appreciated the visualizing density page. That helped me understand it a lot. The section of Paris that my dad's generation would call the upper town, designed 150 years ago, and how that fits into the 50 number of today. That really helped me understand it better. So thanks for that in particular. I was happy to hear a pretty firm position on employment land conversion. And I recognize that I may have to paraphrase this question for some of the delegations coming up, or maybe they'll hear and understand the implication of the question and maybe respond to it as part of their presentations. But excuse me, we hear from people who want to see farmland converted to employment land for the future of our community. But then we see requests, sometimes the same night, from developers who wish to convert their employment land to residential. And we can see where these dynamics cause concern for our residents. Would you say, and from the feedback that you've received, would you agree that there would be more appetite from our residents for employment land expansion if we didn't keep seeing the conversions to residential requests? And is that part of the establishing your recommendation towards taking a firm position on those conversions?
Thank you, Councillor, and through Mayor Bailey to Councillor House. Yep, I can answer that question. So it's two-part. First of all, back in April, you heard Jamie Cook from Watson talk about employment land conversions. And there's quite a detailed criteria analysis that they are undergoing. And we have it ready. And we've talked to a couple of the submissions. We have 5 of them. And we're at a point now where we have that ready. And our analysis has indicated, based on that criteria, and the submissions were due by December 31st of last year because of the analysis that they undertake. It's quite a detailed analysis, and the Municipal Comprehensive Review says you have to do this analysis. The criteria was posted on our website. So that's the number one thing, that it's based on that. And it's based on everything from need to their adjacency to their proximity, in terms of all those details. And the second thing, so there's that, and that's one of the number one reasons is why we're saying no, is they did not meet the criteria analysis. The second thing is that I have heard from the public and our community members about expansions is, first of all, why did we even accept them? And there seems to be a dichotomy going on where we are accepting employment land conversions to residential when we don't need any residential growth, especially in our urban centers. But yet, if we take away the employment lands, we're just adding it to the agricultural area. And it seems a bit suspicious to them. But it's not, because it's based on some very stringent criteria, I have to say. But it does, from a public perspective, not look good in terms of that. But I have to say that we have to allow every submission. I have to review everything, and I do that on behalf, and we have a lot of meetings. So I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. I believe it does. I believe your, especially the second part, my focus is a little more on the perspective of the residents, and I just think and you've kind of seen the same thing to some degree, that people would be more understanding of requests for increased employment land if they didn't keep seeing requests for that land to be converted into more houses. So I appreciate your answer, and as always, all the work you're doing. Thank you.
Are there any other questions now, or do you want to wait until we go public with this? Yeah, I see some heads shaking, so I think what we'll do, thank you, Jennifer, and you're back up on 4.4, so don't go too far away. The public hearing, 4.2 portion of the meeting is now open, and we'll go to 4.2.1. Eric, representing GSP. If you'd like to state your name, please, and your address. You have 10 minutes to speak, and once you're getting close to 9 minutes, you're going to hear from the lovely Heather Boyd. She's going to give you a 1-minute warning. So welcome.
Well, thank you, Mayor Bailey, members of council. My name is Eric Salas-Lam with GSP Group. We're planning consultants to Green Life Proteins Limited and 216-2697 Ontario Inc. And as you may recall, we made a presentation on our client's behalf at the April 22nd meeting regarding employment lands. As you may recall, they have employment lands on the south side of the Cairnsville community. And we made a request on their behalf for consideration of expansion of the Cairnsville boundary for employment purposes. And as part of our presentation, we had indicated that it was well suited for employment, given its proximity to adjacency to other employment uses, proximity to the Highway 403, less approximately 3 kilometers and a 3 to 4 minute drive. And the fact that it was well served by main roads, County Road 18, which is a 4-lane road, as well as Colburn Street East, which consists of 4 traveled lanes and a central turning lane to Papel Road. Appended to the agenda is our letter, which we submitted supplementary to the April 22nd meeting. It's dated May 26th, and I believe it's on your addendum agenda. And we identified through the discussions with our client that portions of the properties had been previously used for industrial uses. Green Life Proteins was at the terminus of Papel Road on the property. And it was, given that nature of the business, there was extensions of the natural gas pipeline, a 4-inch main, as well as hydro lines providing 1,000 amp service. And given that and the adjacency and the locational attributes, we're of the opinion that it is suitable for employment uses, and it meets the attributes and a number of different features for that employers are looking for. And we provided a little bit more information. The visibility along highway or along County Road 18, we're anticipating that would be more prestige uses, be subject to high quality urban design. And then the lands further back from County Road 18 could be for a broader range and mix of residential uses. Now, we're noting that the county is currently undergoing a class environmental assessment, looking at extending services from Brantford to the Cairnsville area. So the area will be served by full municipal services. And we're asking that, through the comprehensive review, if our clients' lands are looked at for potentially designation as an employment area, that the Class EA process could look at providing sanitary and water services to there as well. And I think those are the main portions of my presentation to you. Like, as I said, the Cairnsville area is well suited for employment uses. It's located close to the 403. It serves as employment opportunities serving the eastern portions of Brant County, but as well, it's immediately adjacent to Brantford as well. So in our opinion, it is suitable for consideration for urban use. And I'm available for any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Eric. Are there any questions to the presenter? Does anyone have anything they're not clear on? Seeing now, no questions. Oh, Councillor Gatward.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Eric. The Papel Road lands that are on the north side of Colburn Street East. How many hectares are there in that particular property that borders the old 403 and Papel Road?
It's a fairly sizable parcel. They own multiple land holdings, but the area that that our client is focused on is about 80 to 90 acres of land, and that's the portion of land that are immediately to the west of the creek. I think it's Fairchild Creek, if memory serves, and that would be the area that they're focusing on right now.
Okay, and you said that there's a 4-inch gas line that runs down.
Yeah, my understanding is that
Road?
there's yes, and like on page 2 of our May 26th letter, it shows the Green Life Protein a photo that our client provided of the former industrial use that was on that portion of property.
Right.
And that's what the gas main provided service to, as well as the hydro service, the upgraded hydro service.
And I'm pretty sure that there's municipal water on Papel Road down a certain length. As far as the new crusher property that we recently authorized aggregate crusher on. Am I correct on that?
I believe so, but I'm not 100% sure on that.
Yeah. I think I recall seeing a water hydrant out there when I looked at that some months ago, but thank you very much. 80 acres approximately.
Approximately, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for? Seeing none. Thank you for coming out tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll move on then, please, to 4.2.2. David from MHBC.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of council. Thanks for the opportunity to speak this evening. I do appreciate the amount of work that staff have put into getting the official plan to this point and the approach to the policy directions. And I'm here for two reasons tonight. One is to continue to support the work that is going into looking at the employment area expansions in the priority employment and strategic areas along the 403 corridor at Rest Acres Road. We continue to support looking at that area as a whole and opportunities to designate lands that would be required to meet your employment shortfall and additional lands as you plan for the future for employment uses. So we're here in support of that. What we're here tonight, what we have some concern with as it relates to the TCA lands on Sharp Road is the statement that relates to not supporting conversions. And I think there's opportunity for more discussion here. We've made some submission to county staff to convert to residential. We've had discussions and acknowledge Ms. Boyer's comments, but we've also proposed the idea of mixed use. And that could include providing jobs and residential in that Sharp Road area. And there's a few moving parts here. You're looking at a need to provide additional employment lands. At the same time, we're hearing, well, we can't consider conversions because there's a shortfall of employment. Well, you're going to respond to your shortfall of employment when you consider designating new employment lands. So the need associated with employment is going to be considered, and therefore, in my opinion, you can start to look at these conversions. I also want to suggest to you that while I understand the comments that were made with regard to the public, the area that we're looking at on Sharp Road is at the very end of Sharp Road employment area. And the area around that includes Curtis Avenue, an existing residential area, and a significant amount of land planned for new residential development. So I think when we talk about conversions, we have to also be thinking about compatibility. So there's need, which will be satisfied, and then compatibility. Is it appropriate to start to locate the forms of industrial that you're looking to come to the county within an existing area with estate residential, I could argue, and planned residential that will have a mix and range of residential uses? The land's also very fragmented. There's wetlands and natural features, and it doesn't lend itself well to large employment users. Does it lend itself well to more of a mix of retail, office, residential? I think that's what we need to talk about a little bit more and to consider. So we're concerned that tonight you're going to be making a statement that you don't support conversions, but we don't have all the information in front of us. We don't have the criteria analysis that staff have prepared, or we haven't seen it, and I understand that's to come further. You don't have a conclusion on how much land you're going to designate for residential. In my opinion, you're going to designate the amount of land that you need to meet the shortfall and consider additional lands to support long-term planning for employment areas. So we are simply requesting tonight that that conclusion perhaps be deferred to allow us to have further discussion with staff and an opportunity to provide council with more information to consider once we have all of the information in front of us. So we think there's much more than just calculation to come to a determination on what's best for that area in the Sharp Road than looking at surplus and shortfall. The planning in that area is much bigger than the numbers. And so we want to make sure that we do the planning, we consider the complete community, we can look at providing jobs in that area in a different way that could be mixed use. So it wouldn't be a full conversion. It would be, making some commitment to providing some level of jobs and allowing for some residential. So we think there's opportunity there. We think it's a great location in Paris. It's well connected to existing amenities. The trail is right there. It's well connected to the commercial areas, and it's in close proximity to food stores, medical offices. So again, let's take a look at how we can use those lands that are in the built-up area, support your intensification, and create jobs there as well. And so tonight we're asking for consideration of the TCA lands. If you're looking at supporting or endorsing this conclusion that staff is coming forward, if we could hit the pause button as it relates to the TCA lands or defer a decision there to allow all the information to be brought forward and some further discussion and presentation for council to look at what we can do in the area and then make a decision. And thanks for your time this evening, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, David. Are there any questions to the presenter? Councillor Miller, you're first, then Councillor House.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A quick question for you to Dave. Dave, maybe you know, maybe you don't, and if you don't answer, that's fine. But is TCA, are they getting close to coming up with a proposal or something to submit to planning on this?
Through Council, through Mr. Chair, to Councillor Miller, we had filed an application to county staff. And we had looked at different land uses and how we could work to solve the transportation in the area, a potential road system that provided connections. And through discussions with staff, we had agreed to remove our request on the application and work with staff through the official plan review process. So we had an application submitted. It didn't get in front of you because it was, we agreed with staff that we would remove the request and work through the official plan process. We'd be happy to share that information for council consideration. And I think there's been a lot of good work, and we had a lot of discussion with staff to even get to that point previously.
Okay. Yeah, no, I'll be honest. You piqued my curiosity as to what you guys got planned. It does sound interesting. But having said that, you're a planner, you know darn well that this isn't the end of the road. I mean, there's always official plan amendments, even after the OP's gone through. So
through Mr. Chair, I appreciate the comment on it's not always amendments, but this could potentially be the end of the road. And perhaps staff could confirm if I'm incorrect. But if the official plan is approved without consideration of conversion or a mixed use, there is no ability for TCA or a landowner to make an application to amend the official plan to convert lands. The time is either through an official plan review or the application that we made that could have been considered before the county completes their official plan review. Maybe staff could confirm, but that's the importance of the decision and the official plan process that is happening now.
Thank you.
Okay.
Jennifer, do you want to respond to that?
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. Yes, I can respond to the councillor's question. And thank you, Dave, for your presentation. It was very well done. I appreciate that and appreciate your comments about us working together and the hard work. So I just want to reiterate tonight is about information and direction. There are no decisions being made tonight. And we are still in the consultation process, but we have made obviously these high-arching statements about where we're going. So that's what tonight is about. So you're not making a recommendation on each employment land conversion, but Dave is correct that, you know, if we are saying there's no conversions and that's the way we're going, that at the end of the road, at the end of our OP, when it's finalized, is that there is no appeal to our OP. So you cannot resubmit an official plan amendment. So Dave is correct in that. And just to reiterate that MHBC with TCA did submit an official plan amendment in October of 2019. It was deemed incomplete and put on hold because our municipal comprehensive review was not done. An employment land conversion has to go through the MCR, as Dave mentioned. So that's where we're at. And we've had a lot of discussions and we did come up with something, you know, when it seemed that this was not going to happen, the conversion. They were looking at, you know, a different alternative, and that's how the concept of mixed use came up. So, but our analysis has indicated that it's not, the conversion would not be supported for employment. So, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Miller, does that answer your question?
I'm just going to put away my can opener for now, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, it answers it very well. So, but I expect to hear a little more on this one, though. I really do. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Howes and then Councillor Gatward.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Dave. Dave, thanks for the presentation. And I'm going to bounce back to a version of my questions to Jennifer before. I do always try to put myself in the shoes of you or your clients to understand that perspective. And I'm a capitalist at heart. I get it. But I hope too that you can put yourselves in our shoes a little bit and see my point that I was making earlier about the appetite of the people in our community for what can result in significantly more houses, right? We've received a strong message from our community about they want to slow down the growth, and when it comes to, I made my point already about conversions and supporting staff's recommendation on regarding that, but on the mixed use issue, how would we best respond to residents' concern that when they hear the words mixed use, that's a slippery slope towards just more houses? And that's not specific necessarily to your application, but just in general, I'm interested in your thoughts on that.
Yeah, thank you, and through Mr. Mayor to Councillor House, appreciate your comments and the questions that you're asking, and again, the way that that I've been looking at this is almost separating it from the statements associated with settlement boundary expansion and residential settlement boundary expansion. Because what we're talking about is an area that's generally would be in the built up area. It's in the built up portion of Paris. It's more of an infill because the lands on Dundas are built out. Curtis Ave is built out, and what we're looking at, the portion we're looking at, is really an extension of Sharp Road. Sharp Road ends now and the employment area is built out to there. And that extension is the area we're talking about. So it would be, not an extension of employment in the type of employment that you're looking at Rest Acres and 403. The lands are just too fragmented. The transportation network isn't really quite there, and there will be new residential. So the new industrial would have to drive right past new residential lands that would develop in the future. And you would be introducing industrial vehicles into a residential area. So that's when we're talking about compatibility and how does that neighborhood function. The idea of mixed use is really to look at the employment numbers. What potentially would be the employment numbers associated with those lands, and how can we look at providing jobs that would make sure a similar number of jobs are provided on those lands. It may include the additional residential happening there, but it would also protect the number of jobs that you're trying to accommodate within the municipality. And again, I think in that area, the residential potential could provide really a mix of residential types that would be very well located. They would be within proximity to all the amenities and recreation and all of the planning directions that you would be looking to. So while I appreciate the comments associated with the shortfalls and the needs, I think we also need to look at the community planning aspects of an area, and we can come forward and share a little bit more information on what that would look like, and that's what we're asking for consideration to do. Share some information to help inform the discussion and a decision.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Gatward, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Mr. Aston. The Sharp Road industrial area that I believe we're speaking about had originally a plan, small industrial lots, and it is a dead end, as you mentioned. However, there was enough space to have several industrial lots. And I guess I'm wondering, why does your client not want to develop this as a small industrial area?
Through Mr. Mayor to the councillor, I think two things. Our client TCA has always been part of the industrial and employment development area within the county, and as you know, has lands in the Rest Acres 403 corridor that we're working with county staff right now to try and bring online for future employment lands that'll provide for a mix of types. When you're looking at employment and industrial lands, and why the county is so successful in their employment lands is access. And Rest Acres Road and the 403 has superior access, for example, to Sharp Road. The lands, the dead end lands at the end, the access is just not great. There's no visibility, and it would be surrounded by uses that could create compatibility associated with industrial. So small industrial uses, there could be concerns as the residential areas start to build around it of complaints. And so again, what we're talking about is let's consider those things in the planning. I think just the straightforward answer is the lands aren't a high priority for those looking as industrial businesses as those lands that are at Rest Acres and 403.
Well, thank you for that answer, but I'm sure you must realize everyone can't be at the corner of 403 and Rest Acres, and those lands are being gobbled up as we speak. So I think we have to look at other areas in the county. And of course, when your client purchased those lands, they were industrial and they knew that. So I guess I can understand your concern about perhaps there may be compatibility issues, and perhaps not every industry wants to locate on Main Street 403. However, I will take your comments under consideration. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
And
Councillor.
Mr. Mayor, just a comment. I know in discussion with our client, their lands at 403 Rest Acres Road, they are continuously receiving calls and requests associated with the timing for those lands to come on board. I don't think they've been receiving any calls associated with the Sharp Road lands. So again, it's just an example of the demand and the type of employment lands that people are looking for at this point in time.
Thank you, David. Councillor Bell, you have something?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. A question to Dave and a question to staff related to something Dave said earlier. To Dave, you heard earlier from Jennifer that we have 395 hectares of excess residential land. Just a common sense question, why would we want to add to that 395 hectares? And just in relation to your comment about compatibility, wherever there's always going to be a boundary between residential and non-residential, whether it's agricultural or industrial. And it just happens that this piece of land could be one of those boundaries. But if you could answer the first question, I'd be very happy, and I can come back to staff thereafter.
Sure, thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. My understanding of the excess lands, when you're talking about excess lands, it includes a mix of different types of lands that are not serviced, maybe in rural settlements, and are kind of in a greenfield sense when thinking about excess land. So when people talk about additional lands, they sometimes take, additional lands may mean urban expansions. I'm not disputing excess lands. What we're giving thought to is also the objectives the county has to look at intensification and development in fully serviced areas and providing alternative types of housing. And we think this is a location that can support those objectives. And then I just wanted to comment on the second, because again, I understand the how land use divisions can work, and sometimes there's divisions associated with natural areas or roads or urban boundaries. And I think the area in Sharp Road is an historic land use designation. What we're talking about is taking what's existing and planning a new road connection and new connections through the community to help improve transportation in the area. And by doing so, we can also provide, and we can share these plans, and I wish I had them tonight. We're looking to use the natural features and a potential new park space to provide that buffer between the existing industrial and what would be a newly proposed. So again, we can talk about the design. We'd like to talk about the potential for mixed use. We just think there's a great opportunity within that area to continue to provide jobs, because there are still portions that TCA will develop for industrial lands from which they purchased from the county. And then what we could do, to really continue to build on that area of Paris as a complete community.
Okay, thank you. Let me ask the question then to staff, probably to Jennifer, and she could answer your question about what the 395 hectares contains. But my question related to your statement that this could be considered part of the infill, that it is a built-up area. And I'd like to hear from Jennifer whether we would consider it the same, and if it would therefore become part of the infill or the intensification area.
Jennifer?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Bell. So the Sharp Road area is in the built-up area of the Paris settlement area boundary. So it's in the built-up area. It would be considered intensification, but our criteria analysis doesn't look at it in terms of where it's located. It just looks at if it's in the urban area. And in terms of our designated greenfield area and excess lands, the DGA excess lands is actually in our designated greenfield area, so outside of our built-up area. So that's in Paris and St. George. So that's where our excess lands are. And it's the areas, like Dave said, that are not developed yet. And that's where the surplus lies.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Are there any other questions for Dave? Councillor Leferrier?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Dave. I guess to reiterate and maybe expand on Councillor Howe's point, I think there's also a bit of a fear, not just when we convert different lands to different uses that aren't as desired by the community, but there's the fear that, and I'm not sure how this will work, but there's a bit of a fear that the organization could just do the housing and then delay the light industrial, especially if you don't have clients for it. So I'm a little confused by it. It's almost like I'm hearing that the industrial lands aren't working as industrial lands, but if we build a mix of houses and industrial, the industrial will work too. And my experience has been that mix doesn't necessarily work, or that folks don't desire both of those uses to be right next to or within each other's space. So if the industrial piece isn't working as it is, what about adding housing to it will make the light industrial work better?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Leferrier. Sorry, my screen is falling over. Just to clarify, when we're talking about mixed use, for example, the thinking that we've been doing on mixed use would be that it would be, for example, residential on upper floors and retail or commercial on ground floors, or there could be a mix of commercial on the ground floor and office above. And so it's not that in that area we're looking to mix the industrial with the residential, because I would agree with you. In that way, we would just continuing to potentially create compatibility issues. What we were looking at is at the end of Sharp Road, there were lands that TCA purchased from the county that would continue to remain employment. And then there's a portion that as you get past, there's a wetland area, and then there's a portion where the lands start to become designated residential. As you start to get into that part of the community, that's the area that our original request was for residential. And through talking with staff and what we've been hearing, we've proposed and started to talk about the idea of mixed use that would be, like I said, ground floor commercial, residential above. And your official plan could have specific policies that talk about in a building you need to have that mix of use. So that's where we'd like to continue to explore that, and like to have an opportunity to come back to council and show you some ideas that we have to how that may work in that part of the community.
Thank you.
Are there any, Councillor Miller?
I just want to put a little bit of context to it, Mr. Mayor. As a council, I mean, we have looked at this area for a long time. And as been pointed out during our discussion tonight, it's not an easy piece of employment land. There's a lot of natural heritage features. It's an awkward kind of an area. So when you see something like that, and it kind of makes sense, I think it's worth something having a look at. But like I said, I just want to put a little bit of context there that we have looked at this and had different proposals over the years, and then nothing's ever really panned out. So that's why, like I say, I would be, when Dave asked to start talking, he really piqued my curiosity. So I like I say, I said it before, I'll say it again, I'd love to see the plans.
Thank you, Councillor Miller. Are there any other questions to Dave? Councillor Chambers, please.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor, to Dave. I hope I'm not echoing. If I am, I apologize. Dave, you mentioned something in one of your answers with regard to what I'll call the sellability of lands in proximity to the 403 interchanges and lands not in proximity to the 403 interchanges. If you were advising the council on employment designated lands, how would you work that fact, I suppose, into a recommendation for council? That may be a confusing question, but I think you can handle it.
Yeah, thank you.
And I have a second question. Do that.
Okay, through Mr. Mayor, I know I always think of industrial areas, and of course you have different types of industrial areas in your municipality, and the industrial areas that have been successful as of late. The perfect example are the lands at 403 and Rest Acres, and part of that was part of council's decision to move forward with the county-owned park. I think there's a real asset with a major highway and connection and linkage of a highway to major centers, and you also have a key arterial road with Rest Acres Road, and there's been a lot of emphasis and infrastructure investment in that area. And my opinion, that is where you want to continue to invest and to grow. The investments you're putting in now and considering, you want to use those to the fullest extent possible, and take advantage of your really strategic location. I think areas and other municipalities have different criteria, and some of the criteria did consider proximity and visibility to major transportation corridors, and if they had or didn't have direct access connections to major transportation corridors. So that's why I'm suggesting this as it relates to the TCA lands is you start to introduce industrial in areas that are existing or planned for residential. You're starting to potentially introduce compatibility issues that could otherwise be avoided through the broader community planning exercise.
Thank you. Councillor Chambers, you had a follow-up question?
Yes, not a follow-up, but maybe of the theme be a good way to put it. Dave, just setting aside the TCA lands for a minute and just using your expertise as a professional planner, and I know you are an exceptional professional planner, so you can give good advice. If you were advising council on the conversion of industrial lands, make the case to me why that makes good, complete logical planning sense to allow conversions of industrial lands in certain situations and are not necessarily associated with TCA. Just why does it make good sense, or does
through Mr. Mayor to Councillor Chambers? First of all, I really appreciate the compliment, number one. So thank you. And what I can share is I have worked on a number of employment conversions in other municipalities and worked through in the region of Waterloo on some in the city of Cambridge, and some of them very similar, where there was planned industrial lands within areas that were planned and designated for residential. And again, it's generally the criteria to look at. I fully acknowledge there's a need component associated with the criteria. So I'm not disputing that there's not that. What I'm trying to suggest is once you establish your future employment lands, that need is going to be addressed. You won't have a shortage anymore. Council, I believe, is going to make a decision to add employment lands to meet that shortfall. So that takes need off the table from employment lands and removing what I would say lower class employment lands from designation. Then I think you need to consider how would that employment land even function? Is it large enough? Are there compatibility issues? Is it fragmented? Is there a good transportation network? Is there good visibility? And those types of criteria, in our opinion, these lands need to meet to stay industrial. So there may be other lands in the county that are in larger business parks that still meet, that idea of needing to stay industrial because they may have a good transportation network and be well connected and maybe be within an industrial area where there would be no compatibility concerns. So those are the types of things that I look at, not just the needs and analysis and the numbers when it comes to community planning.
Thank you. Councillor Chambers, follow up?
Yeah, and now follow up for one last question, Mr. Mayor.
Yep.
And again, just using your planning expertise, I would say that some of the employment lands that are designated in the county presently were designated even prior to the completion of the 403, which is one of the flaws in our official plan process. It carried through the individual constituent municipality official plans into the omnibus official plan. So some of these employment lands that we're maybe talking about were designated as employment lands even prior to the completion of the 403. And some of us can remember that. How would you work that if you were trying to make the case for converting some industrial lands? How would you work that fact into a reasonable attempt to try to justify the conversion of employment lands?
Through Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Chambers, appreciate the comment. I don't have that history that some of you may have in the connection to previous employment designations. And I think, it is an important consideration because if you look at the key or strategic employment areas, generally they've been identified by the province at key interchanges and along key highway corridors. So I think historically it would, to look back to see why the lands were designated or how they were designated and what the transportation network or community planning was at the time, would shed some light on maybe why the designation and then the consideration as to at the time why they were considered employment lands and maybe priority at the time versus what would be priority employment lands in today's light as it relates to the official plan.
Thank you, Dave. Are there any other I think we got to move on here. Are there any other questions for Dave? No, we're gonna have to charge your rent, Dave, if you stay much longer.
I apologize.
No, thank you. It was a lot of great information. So thank you for presenting tonight. And we'll move on then if everyone's finished.
Thank you for the
Yeah.
opportunity.
Thank you. Good night. 4.2.3, please. Robert Walters from Weston Consulting. Are you with us? Oh, there you are.
Yes, I am, Your Worship. Good evening, members of council. You may remember I addressed 2 clients that I represent in Canesville. I'm a senior associate with Weston Consulting, and I represent 2 clients that have made employment conversion requests in Canesville. One is Danny Dominikas, who's the owner of 95 Old Onondaga Road in Canesville. He has 19.4 hectares. The other is a professional development company, which is 2181618 Ontario Inc., which owns lands north of 366 County Road 18 in Canesville at 64.5 hectares. I just want to make some brief comments. I won't go over the attributes of why these lands should be converted because I went over that last time. But the bottom line is that our clients have owned these lands for at least 13 years, and there haven't been any interest at all to develop them for employment uses. And we have had some offline discussions with staff on why they believe these lands should stay employment. And that's because they've indicated to us that they've had information presented from economic development indicating that once these lands are serviced, that there will be an uptake in demand. The problem with that is that we don't have that information substantiated in this report before you or in any other report. What we have is numbers or statistics really, which are released by staff saying that out of all the vacant employment land in the county, 44% is in the rural settlement areas, and that there's only going to be an uptake between 2016 and 2051 of 11%. So we would appreciate having that expected demand proven and substantiated in the upcoming draft MCR, which I guess is going to be presented in July 29th. Secondly, we've reviewed the staff presentation, the staff report, and the Watson report. And in that report, I realized at the beginning of the report, it says it's for information, but in that report, it says that staff have completed a draft MCR preliminary analysis and that they're providing certain preliminary policy directions, and they've concluded, quote, that they will not be recommending employment conversions. The report goes on to say that they've done a detailed comprehensive examination against provincial policies, a detailed matrix which considers local land use issues, and that will be made available a month and a half from now. Well, we don't have it now. Back in October, we were requested, along with the other consultants, to provide an analysis against criteria, which Jennifer spoke of, and which apparently they've done, but it hasn't been revealed to us. And we'd like to see that analysis. We feel that if staff are confident enough to make a conclusion that they won't be recommending employment conversions, that the analysis that goes along with that should be presented. This meeting is an official meeting under Section 26 of the Planning Act, and it's required to be a fair hearing under Section 61, and I don't think it meets that criteria because we don't have the ability to respond to the conclusion. There's no information that's been provided for us to respond to. Thirdly, we are pleased to see that Watson has recommended that there be a policy framework which concisely speaks to the servicing, allocation, and phasing for the Canesville area. And we would request, regardless of the land use that's approved for our clients' properties, that that framework be embedded in the new official plan and reflect the current servicing targets that the county is undertaking. We've spoken with the project manager, and he's indicated that the Class EA will be completed at the end of this year. There will be 2 years of design, and then services will be installed. And we think, regardless of the land use, if you want these lands to be developed rather than remain dormant like they have, that framework has to be, and that schedule has to be embedded in the new official plan. So that concludes my remarks, Your Worship, and I'd be pleased to answer any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Any questions to the presenter? Councillor Howe is your first.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Mr. Walters. I'm hoping that you can help me understand your specific land situation a little bit better, because I keep hearing that demand for employment land between Hamilton and Winds and Woodstock, let's say, is increasing, and it's a high demand area, and everybody's running out of land, and I'm having trouble understanding. And admittedly, I don't know your property well, but if you can educate me a little bit on why there's supposedly so much demand everywhere, but it's not working out there.
Certainly, through your worship. Well, the properties that our clients have are south of the CN rail tracks in Canesville. It's currently all vacant land, and it's currently unserviced. And you're aware that there is an agreement with the city of Brantford to service all of Canesville, and because of the failure of the lagoons north of the CNR tracks, that's being expedited. But in our view, and if you look at the analysis in our planning rationale, they're not prime employment lands, because they're somewhat removed from major transportation routes, including the 403. They're zoned heavy industrial right now, and that may change, but they're designated for heavy industrial use, and they're across from suburban residential use. And most industrial developers will tell you they don't want to locate next to residential because they're going to get complaints about noise, odor, and vibration, etc. Also, there just hasn't been any demand. I mean, the lands have been vacant for at least 13 years, and the clients, and one of them is a professional developer, and they do develop residential, granted, but they haven't been approached for any uses on their lands because of the employment designation. There's just no interest in it, and it's also not prestige employment land because it doesn't have exposure on a major transportation route, and it's not under your current official plan, although it's being changed. It's not considered a priority employment area.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the presenter? Councillor Gatward, and then Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Mr. Walters. You mentioned the land was dormant and vacant. Aren't the lands rented out, and aren't they growing farm crops?
Through your worship, they are, I believe, one or both are growing farm crops, and that's probably being done for tax reasons, but it's not planned for agricultural land, and it's not prime agricultural land either. Part of it is zoned agriculture, and part of it is zoned for industrial use, heavy industrial use. But it's not. I mean, that's an interim use until the ultimate use dictated by the official plan could be realized.
And I drive by there quite often, and I know where this property is, and I think the client that you represent, does he do industrial development as well as residential, or mainly residential?
I believe mainly residential, and they do have market information that shows, both clients do have market information that shows that there is demand for residential here. If this was serviced for residential, there would be demand for residential units, but they don't have that for employment.
So if your client does mainly residential development, and I believe it's Cerberra Group,
right?
Why would they buy an industrial property?
Because they thought probably it was a good investment. It was, I mean, I can't speak for them, but I suspect it would have been discounted because it's not serviced and because there is no demand for employment, and it would be with the intent of getting residential permissions on it. Because there's no interest for employment.
Yeah, and County Road 18 is one of the major arterials in the county. There is over 10,000 vehicles a day, and I realize that isn't anything compared to the Mississaugas and the Miltons, but in our little rural county, it's a significant road. And that's all the questions I have, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gatward. Councillor Miller, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Real quick question there to Mr. Walters. Are you of the opinion that if it was serviced, it would be much more marketable? It would sell a lot easier if it was serviced?
The fallback position that our clients have, although they don't want employment uses on the lands, that better service than nothing. But they still don't. We're waiting to see this information that the staff say they have from the Economic Development Department, that there's going to be a demand in this area for shovel-ready land. Everything comes in, because our clients aren't convinced of that. They've had discussions with developers who build employment uses, and that discussion has come up, and there's nobody waiting in the wings for the servicing to come in who's going to build employment uses.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Miller. Any other questions to the presenter? Seeing none, thank you for, well,
I do have one. Well, am I able to ask staff a question on this file, on this piece, or is that for later?
I think it's for later on 4.4.
No problem. I'll hold it.
I think so. I think there's going to be a lot then. Any other questions to the presenter? Seeing none, thank you for your presentation tonight.
Thanks very much.
And we'll move on then, please, to 4.2.4. Douglas Stewart from IBI.
Good evening to members of council and the mayor and council. I have a slide that staff are going to put up, if that's still possible.
Yep, I think so. Heather, are you able to share the screen? Or
yep,
someone?
Just give me 1 second.
Thank you.
Sure.
There we go. Thank you.
So thank you to staff. I appreciate it. So I'm here on behalf of the property owner that is making a request to expand the settlement as shown on the slide. We have prepared a written submission which staff have. It's a fairly comprehensive review of all of the policy aspects and explains what the request is. We've spoken with staff, and we look forward to continuing to speak to staff. What I want council to focus to is this request is done in stages A, B, and C. Each one would be dealt with on its own and could be considered independently. We've made the request from a comprehensive perspective. We want council to focus on that this could be considered what I would call a minor rounding out of this settlement. What's important is the request is adjacent to the current urban boundary. It also supports what the official plan has been based upon, your plan, the one in place today and the one in the future, that housing choice and housing diversity are important aspects. We all don't have to live in the same area. There are opportunities out there, and this is intended to support that principle. What's important also is the remainder of the parcel of land would continue to remain as agricultural, and in fact can be considered an independent farm parcel in as much as that it has frontage on streets and it has a sufficient land area to support an agricultural operation as defined by your official plan. So the integrity of agriculture is being retained. So perhaps one would say, well, you're taking away agricultural land to put it into urban. Those locations, A and B, and somewhat C, are parts of the agricultural parcel that, because of topography and such, and being adjacent to the existing urban area, aren't farmed today. If I deal with proposal A, the intent is, if you look at the map, is to take the existing boundary to the east and connect it to the existing boundary on the west. It would provide for single detached housing fronting on the existing street, which in effect would mirror what is across the street. So it would be through the consent process. It would support on private septic and would help contribute to the future servicing of water. Potentially, based on servicing, there could be 11 to 12 residential parcels, single detached. To help, if you take 4 persons, which is much more than what your official plan contemplates per house, that is less than 50 people would occupy those potential housing. Parcel B could be dealt with as an extension of the approved subdivision to the west, which is a street that ends in a cul-de-sac, but was actually planned to be extended. If parcel B was into the settlement area, it would provide for the extension of the street to connect back to the existing Oak Street. Again, that would provide between 16 to 17 single detached housing, would be addressed through a plan of subdivision, would provide for the extension of an existing street, and then most importantly, from a servicing point of view, would provide for the extension of the water, so it would loop. Again, if you apply the number of persons per household, you're looking at approximately 75 people. Area C is an area that has some farming challenges and would provide between 5 to 6 residential parcels, single detached. That would be approximately 25 people and would be addressed through the consent process. When you look at the totality of it, you're looking at less than 150 people, and you're looking at between about 40 odd residential parcels that would help contribute to the existing area. It completes it. It rounds it out, which is the factor we were asking for. We do know there are servicing options being looked at, and they would be dependent upon these residential parcels would be dependent upon that being completed. This request is a scoped, site-specific, small rounding out through processes the county would be responsible for review and approval. There has been a detailed planning justification prepared. Staff have that in hand. One thing we will say is we recognize that this would be a minor rounding out, and as such, we would continue to have our discussions with staff, and this concludes my presentation.
You're on mute, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. I had a motorcycle go by real quick. Thank you very much, Mr. Stewart. Can we take down the slide so that we can see hands for questions? Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Stewart? Councillor Miller?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through to Mr. Stewart. Mr. Stewart, these are the proposed houses would all be on private septic, correct?
If may, through the mayor to you, they would all be on private septic.
Okay. The value of the farmland aside, wouldn't it be good planning to just service this area down the road, and maybe we can get a little more density on that area down the road? Like, because why I'm asking that is if you know yourself, we have enough residential lands. In fact, we have excess, as is pointed out. So we're hoping the county will be here beyond 2051. So wouldn't it be prudent planning, in your opinion, to leave these until they're serviced at some point, because they will be serviced, we know that, and then we can do a little higher density down the road? What say ye?
If I may reply through the mayor to you, I believe that the county has from a residential point of view, have focused their urban growth to the areas of St. George and Paris for good planning reasons. They meet the complete unity. They offer a broad range of services. I think the success the county has had is that isn't where only the housing is proposed. There are other areas within the urban structure where housing is proposed to provide, as I suggested, a diversity of housing. It would be my opinion as a planner that the minor rounding out at this location is appropriate, and to defer that for a potential further bigger scale goes against the principles of the county official plan, and I would suggest goes against the principles of good planning. So in answer to your question, sir, as a professional planner, I don't support what you have recommended.
Okay, I appreciate the answer. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Coleman, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. More a comment to Mr. Stewart. I appreciate your candor and presenting your presentation tonight. My comment is that I think I did pick up on what you said at the start, was not all people want to live in the Paris St. George area. So there are other areas of this county that can support housing and whatnot. So thank you for your comment.
Thank you, Councillor Coleman. Councillor Gatway, did you have something to add?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I did. Through you to Mr. Stewart, the housing that you mentioned would be smaller developments. They wouldn't be big, giant developers like Empire and the other ones we currently have working in our county. These smaller areas would provide home building for our local home builders. They would provide local jobs, and they would provide spin-offs for various local trades and lumber companies that don't get used in huge subdivisions, our local economy. And I realize that we have some water available, municipal water, in that area. And whether that area would be serviced as part of the airport area with the city remains questionable. I'm not sure what the exact servicing plan is for Oak Hill Airport area. However, because this area is very close to the city, it's very desirable and people want to live there. I had a call from a resident, Mr. Stewart, and they asked me, I want to move closer to the city, but I want to live in the county. Is there anything available? So I referred the resident to that area and told her there would be 3 small subdivisions that had approval and were going to be built soon once the water tower was finished. And she was really happy to hear that. So those lots, it's my understanding, are already sold. And so it just shows what a demand there is to live in that area. It's a lovely area in the county. And when you talk about mixed use in that area, on the map that was on the screen, there was some commercial, but you're only proposing homes to support the existing commercial? Is that correct?
If I may, through the mayor to you, the request is for residential. It would be single detached. In answer to your comment about the group that I represent is a local builder. Historically, our local builders do make use of local construction workers, by local, support local. If I may, you as council may be aware, I am the current president of the Brantford Home Builders Association. So I do understand that our membership is made up of a broad range, some from out of town and some from town, and we understand that they all have their perspective. So I think your statement is quite, it is accurate that the local builders tend to buy and make use of local, which is certainly an advantage. With regards to their other comment, the other phase that this group has been involved in, yes, it's already been spoken for, so there is demand. Again, I go back to my first few statements. The official plan strengths, what you have today and what I hope will be maintained through the new plan, is the diversity and housing choice is a key aspect. And this request is for a potential of single detached housing on a street, on an existing street, and the location is some would prefer.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gatward. Are there any other questions for Mr. Stewart? Lots of great information coming forward tonight. Thank you, Mr. Stewart.
You're more than welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, moving forward, are there any other members, Heather, that from the public that want to speak tonight that aren't on the addendum?
I would just ask if any participants would like to speak that haven't previously registered, if they could indicate verbally, that would be great. And maybe if you want to call for any participants 3 times, Mr. Mayor, and then we can close the public hearing part.
All right, so we've called once. Is there anyone from the public that wants to speak?
I will, in support of the official plan.
Cynthia, go ahead.
Thank
Go ahead.
you. Good evening, Cynthia Basitich. In support of the work at a high level, I appreciate the efforts staff, especially Jennifer, has brought forward, and I can identify as a planning professional what a significant undertaking it is. And I applaud staff's efforts in the new official plan that is a more integrated strategic and forward-thinking plan and aligning with the provincial policy. I look forward to working with staff through the process and being able to review and provide feedback and comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Are there any other members of the public that want to speak? Councillor Coleman, you don't have your hand up. Any other members of the public for the second time? I guess we'll start again. Seeing none, we'll ask for the third time. Is there anyone from the public that wishes to speak? Seeing none, we'll close the public piece. And I'm looking for a motion to decide what to do with the Councillor House. Looking for a seconder. What's your motion, Councillor House? Seeking a seconder first, I guess. Thank you, Councillor Pierce. It's on the table. Councillor Miller.
Are we receiving and referring these presentations to staff? Is that what we're doing?
We're going to wait and see what Councillor House says he's going to do.
Oh, okay.
Thanks, Ed. Sorry, I didn't realize I was on mute again. Yes, yeah, move to receive and forward to staff.
Seconded by Councillor Pierce. Are there any questions? Seeing none, call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? And carried. Thank you. 4.3 is the correspondence received. Everyone has a copy of 4.3.1, 4.3.2, 3, 4, 5, and as I said, just came in before the meeting, 4.3.6. Anyone want anything separated for discussion, or are we just going to look for a motion to receive all the correspondence? Looking for someone to receive the correspondence.
Councillor Wade will move to receive.
Thank you, Councillor Wade. And I got Councillor McAlpine right behind you for a seconder. Are there any questions on any of the correspondence? Seeing none, we'll vote to receive the correspondence. All those in favor? Thank you. Opposed? Why would we? Thank you. Okay. We don't want to take a break. We're going to go right into 4.4. We're going to talk about everything. Questions for staff on the presentation that was made earlier? Councillor Miller, you're first.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will make one comment. I thought Jennifer did an excellent job because, and I know she did a great job presenting because I had very specific questions and she managed to answer them in her presentation. I was going to ask about policies relating to the floodplain and she actually explained how she's going to do that. And how do we protect our downtown core areas and our cultural heritage areas? She talked about heritage conservative districts. So I think something like that would be used for protecting the downtown. So I thought she did a great job, and I liked a lot of the policies. I do have a question, and I must have misread this because, or maybe I didn't, well, no, I'd say I didn't understand it. And you said in the report, it's non-appealable. I thought the whole official plan was non-appealable. If somebody comes forward, can they not, I guess they can't appeal, but couldn't they ask for an amendment down the road? They want to turn something into something else. Is that not an option for them, or what am I missing on that?
Jennifer?
Through the mayor to Councillor Miller. Thank you, Councillor Miller, for your kind words. I really appreciate that. In terms of the actual official plan, it's non-appealable for 2 years and the contents within it. So it's got a 2-year, 24-month time frame if it's a brand new OP, if it conforms to the growth plan. But in terms of some of the other specific priorities in the growth plan, there are some provisions that applicants could do. Mr. Stewart tonight talked about Oak Hill and rounding out. That could be considered as an official plan amendment outside of the municipal comprehensive review. The same thing as settlement area boundary expansions. The Growth Secretariat says you can do 40 hectares of expansion outside of the municipal comprehensive review. Those are really the only two things. Otherwise, it's not appealable for 2 years. So
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, if I could follow up. So after 2 years, and okay, the example I'm using is the one Mr. Aston presented. after 2 years, they could come to to planning committee and say, you know, we'd really like to go ahead with this project. Is that an option for them after 2 years?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Miller, I believe so. I don't think Jody is on our call tonight or for legal advice, but we can follow up and get the exact answers for you on that.
Yeah, I would appreciate, I know it's a bit of work, but I'd appreciate an answer, and I'd certainly take it in a Friday file or at council or whatever you guys see fit. So, okay, I'll leave it at. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you, Councillor Miller.
Great presentation.
It was a very good presentation. Councillor LaFerriere.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Jennifer. The demand piece keeps coming up, and we hear this often when people want to convert. You know, the demand just isn't there. The demand just isn't there like we thought it would be. And I understand it's a speculative real estate market, and lots of this is speculative. And you know, it's not a responsibility as a council to make sure everybody gets their desired return on investment at the exact time they hope to get it, based on whatever trend is happening this minute with housing. But my question is more looking at this maybe from a bit of a historical lens, and maybe some more tenured counselors might have some opinions on this too. That would be helpful to hear. But there's definitely a demand for residential right now, but there's also a lot still in the pipeline, and those trends can change. As more houses come into the market here, into the county, won't that make we keep hearing talk from some of the presentations today that there's less desirable employment land and less prestige employment land, different terms, but as more houses fill the community, doesn't that make that less desirable employment land more desirable over time? You know, 40, 45 years ago, you know, what would we have looked like as a county if we said, well, we weren't a county then, but as a bunch of townships, if we said, you know, where the 403 business park is, boy, that should just be houses, right? Because things change, big infrastructure comes in. But as we get more and more residential and we have thousands in the pipeline, doesn't that increase the prestige and the likelihood that over time, what's seen as lower level, lower tier, less desirable employment land will become more desirable?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor LaFerriere, thanks for that excellent question. We're a couple of things with that. We're of the opinion that, first of all, the employment land conversion requests that you see in front of you are actually in our current inventory. So if we take them out of our inventory, we have even more of a shortfall. And the one issue is that one of the clients tonight, like TCA, has lands at the expansion area of the 403 as well. So if they have lands taken out of the shortfall, they also have expansion requests in as well. But in addition to the actual land needs and the actual price per acre, I've got, we can have actually a strategic initiative. We can ask Michael to respond to this, and Russ Press is on. But it's actually, it's more about serviceability. And I know that the delegation about Sorbera and Keensville says there's no need. Economically developed, and the county, we disagree with that. Because as soon as the services come, there will be a need, and the lands have not been marketed at all. And I think price per acre, the lands for employment have gone up, and I can get corporate support on this to jump in. But I think that we also have to be very cognizant is the county's been not reaching its target in jobs and our density requirements, and we have to be very cognizant about that, about creating too much residential land and not enough employment supportive uses, and we're not meeting our job targets. If you realize with Schedule 3 of the growth forecasting, the Growth Secretariat lowered our employment forecast from the original forecast. It was 28,000 and it went down to 26,000 because we weren't meeting our targets. So it's in this plan that we need to meet those targets. So it's a bit of a part answer, but if you need more corporate support on the actual value of those lands, I could have Michael or someone jump in.
Michael, I see you on. Nice to see you, Michael, by the way. I haven't seen you for a while.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor.
You want to jump
I
in?
think the question was about demand, and it's a difficult question to answer precisely, but I think what I can say, and Allison's on vacation this week, but she would probably confirm this. We field calls all the time, and people, and we provide leads all the time. So there's uptake on a lot of lands. And I spoke to council about this a few months ago to talk about where we were seeing uptake and the evolution of applications to bring new lands to market. But we've seen uptake in redevelopment uptake in Canesville, including some substantive ones right on the right on Colburn Street and on Ewart Ave. So we believe Canesville has a lot of strength, and as the GTA builds out and as Hamilton builds out, we think Canesville has more strength. So we see good future in these lands, and that's why we negotiated with the city of Brantford to get servicing capacity for the Canesville area. That was a primary discussion in the boundary adjustment negotiations, and those lands were contemplated in that agreement that they would be serviced for non-residential use. So we also see a good uptake in we see obviously strong uptake in the 403 corridor. And it's worth noting that we're seeing development applications come forward on those 403 lands that are currently in the settlement boundary. But we also see good uptake on some of the periphery industrial areas like Consolidated Drive and Curtis Avenue. We're seeing redevelopment regularly and interest in those parcels, as well as some of the parcels in the north end of Paris. We've seen some interest in the Burford Business Park at the south end of Burford. We continue to field leads and discuss with landowners out in Princeton. So there is good uptake, and we saw uptake on some of the lands on Bishopsgate Road last year, and we're still fielding inquiries on those. So we believe that there is interest in these lands, that there is a market for them, and we could certainly provide council with more information on that. The ECDEF group go away and do up a white paper for council on this if council was interested. But and council does see occasional and redevelopment applications or Planning Act applications on these properties, and we have several over the last several years. So hopefully that provides some context to the question.
Thank you. Great answers from both staff. Thank you.
Yeah, they are great answers. Thank you. Are there any other questions? Councillor Bell, you're next, and then Councillor Pierce.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Jennifer. Thank you, Jennifer, and to your team. Terrific effort so far. It's a very complex process and lots of boundary conditions, but you did mention the issue of some strategic level questions that we should be answering as a council. And I think that's where I'd like to see us focus. I mean, things that come to mind are any new industrial commercial activity should ideally be focused around the 403. And I think there's a recommendation in there for that. I like the recommendation for no additional settlement boundaries. I think you've cleared up Canesville, which if you look in section 7 of the report we've got today, it shows it as an urban settlement area, as Jennifer mentioned. That's incorrect. So it does cause confusion. I'm glad we got some of that sorted. I have a specific question around affordable housing. There is no target there. And for those of us that are on the Social Services Committee, this is a bit of a challenge. It seems to me that unless we actually have something like inclusionary zoning, or we specify a target, it seems unlikely to me that any of our developers are going to come along and build affordable housing. And so the burden will fall back, I think, to the municipality. And I think that's a really big strategic call that we have to make. Do we want to put a number in this official plan that says X% of all the dwellings going forward will be affordable? And I leave that on the table and ask that Jennifer and the team think about that as they develop the next tool. But there were two pieces of really important feedback from the community. One was about affordable housing, which I've just mentioned. And the second was about control. How do we manage growth? And I think you've indicated tonight there are two levels of control. One is the very high level where you say, this is the settlement boundary, that's it. The next level is the growth management strategy and the phasing of development. Could you say more about when that will come and whether it will be a part of the official plan that we approve?
Through you, the Mayor, to Councillor Bell. I appreciate that, Councillor Bell, all your feedback. We've had some excellent discussions lately on the topics. As part of the growth management strategy, so with July 29th, with the draft OP, we'll be presenting a growth management strategy in terms of the residential growth needs. So our land needs assessment, which is part of the draft MCR. And it will also have the conclusions on our conversion requests and our settlement area boundary expansion. So that's a growth management package that will be coming. And throughout it, we'll be obviously crafting the tools. And at the end, with the final OP in December or January, we'll have a comprehensive growth management strategy and a phasing of development plan, which is really about servicing allocation and the amount of growth that's coming and how it'll be staged over time. You'll see one of the delegations, the letters that were attached to a late agenda addendum today. It was the St. George Landowners Group. If you've had a chance to read it, I suggest you do. They are concerned with this phasing of development. They think that we're going to cap building permits. And I think the intent is more about servicing allocation and phasing the growth over a 30-year period. But I would like you to read that letter and take it into account about that. But that's the end goal, is that we will have that done by the end. So that's the plan. So,
if I may, a couple of follow-up questions. One is related to that, Jennifer. You and I talked about the concept of having a graph with time along one axis, growth on the other axis, and just plotting out what this plan actually develops, what this official plan will result. So going from 2021 to 2051 and picking out the points where we have pinch points, where infrastructure becomes a problem and where we have to put big investments in our plan to make sure that we overcome those pinch points. I know it's not something you could do today, but I would like that the team has a go at making that chart. I've been asking for it for a long time. Now we've probably got all the data that we need to actually put it together. So if that could be done in before we get the official plan for approval, that would be wonderful. And one final question, and it really is a strategic question for us as a county, I think. The employment density target of 15 seems to me quite low. And given that the equation we use is we've got X number of people, we divide it by 15, it tells us how much acreage we want, and we find we have a shortfall. If that number was not 15, but if it was 25, there wouldn't be a shortfall. And I don't want to make too much light of it, but typically what we're pitching for at the moment are big warehousing projects with relatively few jobs for the acreage that we give to those developments. Is that what we want as a county, or do we want to try and push that number up so that we bring in a different kind or a different mix of employment, that, for example, we bring more offices in, we bring more factories where assembling is taking place? And I offer that again as a question, perhaps to Jennifer, but also to the economic development team, that it is a direct driver of the amount of land that we need to reserve for employment. If we could push it up, we wouldn't need as much land. The tensions would go out, especially when we consider the challenges that Jennifer mentioned around the draw on the agricultural lands. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bell. Any other questions to the planner? Councillor, oh, I'm sorry, Councillor Pierce, you were next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, not really a question, but a couple of comments, if I could. First of all, there's been some fantastic questions already asked tonight, and I think it's appreciated all around. To Jennifer and her staff, there has been so much work put into this. There's so much information here. When we look at our online tonight, I think I saw at the most 46 people were viewing it. That's kind of disappointing, to be honest, that this is something that is so important for our county going forward. And I understand that people could go back and watch it, but I have received, several emails on this about certain questions. They have been answered this evening, which is great. But it would be interesting to see, more, I don't want to say support, but more input from our constituents on this. The fact of, as I say, something so important, and we get 49 viewers watching this evening. To me, it doesn't give credit to the work that's gone into this. And to Councillor Bell, I totally appreciate the fact of what you were talking there about the affordable housing, because that was one thing I was going to bring up. This is an amazing report, but that is something that is crucial for our whole county and other counties as well. But we need to worry about the county of Brant here. And I think that's something that absolutely needs to be put into the fact that we've got developers coming in. Let's give them a certain percentage that must be affordable. And I think that's a fantastic idea. And it's something we've spoken about around this horseshoe and as council before. And I think it's something that we need to have going forward. So again, Jennifer and all the staff, thank you very much. To all the delegations that were in tonight with their presentations and the questions that were asked. Thank you. A lot of good questions, and hopefully a lot more than 49 people of the public go back and review this and watch this as they have the opportunity to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pierce. Are there any other questions? Councillor Gatward and then Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you to Jennifer. There's been a lot of talk about residential tonight and the glut of residential that we have in the county. Is the bulk of the residential excess in Paris and St. George? Or is it found throughout the county in the various settlement boundaries, rural villages and hamlets?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Gatward. That's a fabulous question. So we have designated greenfield surplus in our urban areas of Paris and St. George, which we've laid out before in all our presentations, which is the excess lands. But also in our villages and hamlets, we have quite a lot of residential lands. It's either designated like a suburban or a village residential. That's designated, say, in Burford, also in Mount Pleasant. There's a little bit in Keensville along the strip near the river, but we do have actually a surplus of residentially designated lands that are rural outside of Paris and St. George right now. Really the limit on why is servicing. So that's been really the major impetus is why these areas have not been developed, because it's usually just either water and the water availability is not available, or they have to do well and septic, and it's been slower, and that's usually why. So yes, we do.
And thank you for that answer. And you mentioned Mount Pleasant. Now we all know that there's an H currently on any developable lands in Mount Pleasant because of the water situation. And until such time as the city of Brantford provides water to the new areas they inherited in the boundary adjustment, Mount Pleasant will not be able to move forward. And that's unfortunate. Can you tell me, Jennifer, the existing settlement boundary in Mount Pleasant, does it include the former subdivisions that were laid out by Brantford Township? Because I know there's two of them, and I'm just wondering if they are within the settlement boundary currently, and they wouldn't, of course, be available to develop until there's water available.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Gatward, I could probably get one of my staff like Brandon to jump in, but I believe I know which ones you're talking about. One of them is in the boundary, but it does have an H on it because of the water, and one is half in the boundary. So it's got a dual designation on the property, so it's half ag and half in the boundary. And we're cleaning up those anomalies through the official plan because the boundary of Mount Pleasant just cuts through a lot of properties and there's dual designations. So
okay, and that would be on the east side.
That is correct.
Yeah. Thank you for that answer. And yeah, until such time as we have water or can find more water to pump through our treatment plant there on Ellis Ave, there'll be nothing done in Mount Pleasant that isn't already an existing lot of record, correct? Okay.
Well, I could actually ask Councillor Gatward. Rob Walton is on the call, and I could actually get him to talk about just what's going on with Mount Pleasant. I think there's 10 lots left, but if Rob is there still, if he's available.
Thank you.
Hello, Rob.
Good evening, through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Gatward. I don't have the list in front of me, but there is a list of lots of record which can be developed in Mount Pleasant, and it will be a period of time, you know, something like 5+ years before our agreement with the city will be up, and we'll be able to change that.
Thank you. And Jennifer, the other area I wanted to talk about was the Oak Hill area. There is municipal water, and Rob might want to chime in on this as well. There is municipal water in the Oak Hill area. We just increased water with the new tower. The developers locally are anxious to work in that area. And I guess my question is there enough water to do or service what was suggested tonight by Mr. Stewart? Because there'll never be any sewers there until such time as the city brings their sewers to the airport area, as we negotiated in the boundary agreement.
Mr. Walton.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Gatward. As you know, and stated earlier tonight, there are 3 proposals already of historic plans, which are in various stages of coming forward for approvals in the Oak Hill area, and then these 3 proposals tonight. I would have to go back and check the numbers to say where that all adds up to, but off the top of my head, I imagine that it could be accommodated. The number talked of tonight adding into it is not large. So that's my answer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Miller, you were next.
Yeah, talk about the question about affordability housing, and maybe looking at maybe having certain percentages or something like that dedicated to affordable housing. Reminded me, I want to ask too about accessibility. I know in earlier versions, I think you mentioned you know, the aging of the population and stuff like that, and more of us will be needing some kind of assistance. So through you, Mr. Mayor, to Jennifer, is the official plan, is it proper and okay to have accessibility aspects to development in there and request that? I'm not sure if that's something we do, or we do that through another mechanism.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Mallor, I'll actually get my colleague Jessica Kitchen to answer. She's been working with Community and Protective Services and also the Housing Task Force on that issue. So maybe Jess will like to jump in on that.
Hi, Jessica.
Hi, good evening, everyone. So I'd love to answer that question. That's a great question. So the official plan is definitely a great place to include policies that speak to accessible, affordable housing as well, because I know that's been a topic this evening. That's a terrific way to incorporate Brant, the County of Brant's goals for both affordable housing and also accessible housing to make sure that we're meeting our needs going forward. We do know that we have an aging demographic, and we do need to look at accommodating both the aging demographic as well as some affordability for families, single individuals below the age of 60 as well. So we will look to address that through the new official plan as we bring it forward.
Okay, I'm very glad to hear that answer. Thank you very much, Jessica.
Thank you, Councillor Miller. Yeah, that's a really good thing to hear. As someone who sits on the Social Services Committee, and obviously in close contact with people like Lucy Marcos, it's very important that we have affordable housing, and if we can get it in writing, that would be wonderful, because it's just around the corner and it's going to be critical. So we really do need to do something. If you can write it in now, that'd be wonderful. Are there any other questions to Jennifer? Oh, Jessica, you want? wanna
Oh, I was
speak?
just going to quickly add, through you, your worship, that we are working closely with the city of Brantford as well. Through the housing task force, we're working with community services as well for the age-friendly and community plan to make sure that the official plan is aligned and properly reflects what they've been working on, because they've done some amazing work to pull that information together. So we want to be sure that it's included properly.
That's great. That's wonderful, wonderful news. Thank you. Councillor Chambers, you're next, please.
Yes, I'd just like to ask Jennifer a question, an opinion type of question related to employment lands and related to the 403 corridor and related to the employment areas designated prior to the 403 corridor becoming as important as it is. My memory serves me that prior to the development along the 403 Rest Acres interchange, most of the employment areas were designated as employment areas. For example, Sharp Road, for example, Middletown Line in former Burford Township, South Burford, Bishop, etc. When we didn't have the 403 Rest Acres tool in the toolbox for economic development and tried to capture some assessment, we weren't doing that good. We were losing opportunities. Toyotsu or whatever you call it, the ethanol plant, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Everything was going everywhere else. In other words, what we were selling, nobody was buying. And that's my biggest fear if we don't capitalize on the 403 corridor now when we have an opportunity, if indeed we do have an opportunity. We'll have a lot of employment lands that we will be trying to sell, but nobody will be buying, as Mr. Aspen indicated with his client, TCS or whatever it is. So it would seem to me that if we want to be economically developing an economically developing municipality like we are now, we should be capitalizing on the 403 corridor, specifically the interchange and perhaps a proposed interchange at Bishop's Gate. The Rest Acres interchange is almost equidistant from the Peace Bridge and the Blue Water Bridge into the markets. That's why it's so valuable and so important. And that's why companies want to locate there, as opposed to in behind the paint factory in Burford, where they have to truck through a residential area to get to. So my question is really simple enough. It is, why are we not focusing more on the 403 corridor interchanges, Rest Acres Road, Middletown Line, and the proposed Bishopsgate interchange, trying to capture some employment opportunities and capture some assessment that we've been very successful at in the last 5 or 10 years since we've been developing in that area. People are looking for, developers and companies are looking for places like that to locate. And you know that as well as I do, and everybody knows that. The price of land along the 401 corridor and the 403 corridor is through the roof, and people are actively searching that out. Again, I keep using people. I'm prospective industrial employers. So if we're looking at a 30-year time frame, and I'll be 105 in that time, but so I won't see this, but I don't want to miss the opportunity. I've been around 35 years, and I've seen things happen, and I've seen opportunities missed, and I see a glorious opportunity at that 403 corridor where we can capture assessment that will enable us to afford things like the social development that we are moving into. There was a time we couldn't afford to, not so long ago, and Councillor Coleman and Councillor Wheat will remember this, prior to the development on the 403 interchange, our financial position in the county wasn't that great. Since we've been able to attract some industrial development and good industrial development, we have attracted assessment which enables us to provide services to people. I visualize that particular area as key in the future of the county, and I see in our official plan that we are not taking advantage of it to the extent which I think we should. We're relying on historically designated areas which were designated prior to the 403, and it just makes sense to me that you don't want to have industries on the top of Paris that have to truck through downtown Paris to get to the infrastructure to take them where they want to go. They should be at the interchange, not trucking through Paris or Burford or the farmlands or in between. Why are we not focusing more on the 403 corridor interchanges in our official plan? And maybe we are. Maybe you can speak to that.
Here you go, Jennifer.
All right, through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Chambers. Thank you very much for your comments, and it's an excellent synopsis of where we are. So I'll give just a brief overview, and then I could perhaps ask Michael to jump in terms of strategic analysis about the 403. But I think that what the direction is that staff are seeking today and moving forward with the official plan throughout the year is we've made some high-level policy directions, and we've talked about the employment shortfall. So we've talked about this over 100 hectares, that's a minimum. And whatever that is, I think that the direction that we went forward from April, and that's why we put the statement in the report and the policy directions, is we should be focusing on the 403 area. So the shortfall we're recommending should be directed to the 403 because we do not want trucks going through Paris. And it's the types of industry and it's the servicing availability at the 403 and which parcels will be included. One of the other policy directions is actually that we can go beyond our need. We talked about that in April, and it's also in the report that we can preserve and do priority strategic lands. We can reserve them. So what that means is we can put an overlay on them that they're reserved for employment when the need arises, and also when servicing. And in terms of, I guess, the availabilities, the focus on the 403, and I can have either Michael or Rob Walton jump in, is that it's really, I think, a lot of the businesses at 403 are looking for serviced prestige employment lands. So we have to be focusing on that aspect of when service availability will come to be. And those are the exact parcels and the configuration at the 403 that we're analyzing right now and which ones that will come forward. But it is, I think there is agreement in the direction that we should be focusing on. I know you've heard from delegations about removing other employment lands, but I want to assure you that the growth plan gives us the ability to go beyond our need. It's just the direction of council that I need in that respect, and I just have to justify it to the province about that and how far we go. But if Michael wants to jump in just about the 403 and in terms of the actual need and the analysis, or we could just leave it for that and get more information in the coming months. So,
Michael, do you have anything to add?
Thank you, Your Worship, and I think Jennifer laid that out well. And so I think in answer to the question, we are certainly looking at the 403, the opportunities for expansion of the settlement boundary and the designation of new employment lands along the 403. That would be our focus right now. Notwithstanding what I did say about uptake in other areas, which we also think we have a lot of opportunity for. Our focus would be the Rest Acres Road area, because that's where we have servicing right now. And I think I'd mentioned to council a little while ago that I've actually had several conversations with the landowner group in that area and trying to sew up some partnerships out there to make that a little more of an efficient process. So I think we're well aware of that, and we see that area. It's certainly in terms of this official plan as an area where we can expand, and because there is good uptake there. And a lot of that uptake, which was mentioned earlier, is around logistics centers, which have a bit of a bad reputation, but I think are improving in terms of the quality and extent of employment, because logistics centers are becoming a much bigger part of our society, and that's only accelerating because of the COVID experience. So in terms of looking beyond the Rest Acres corridor to Bishopsgate and over to the Princeton area, I think because of the limitations of servicing right now, that could be a goal for the future. And I think we're eerie about designated land that we can't service in a reasonable time, because then it becomes speculatively bought, and then it becomes, a challenge for us to deal with the speculative buying without our ability to service it and then make it actually desirable. So hopefully that answers the question. So I think that the answer is that we're aware of it, and when the official plan comes forward, you will be seeing some additional recommendations to designate additional lands in the 403 areas.
Councillor Chambers, you have another question?
Yeah, just to follow up in an example. Everyone is aware of the Stubbe concrete complex out by New Durham, which is in the middle of the countryside. It is an incredible employer and an incredible operation, and I think we had a tour of that. And it's unfortunate in some respects that it is where it is, because it should be at an interchange along the 403 corridor where the truck traffic is taking advantage of the infrastructure that is in place there. That's a good example of maybe a mistake that was made in not consolidating along a 403 infrastructure, because I get emails almost daily complaining about truck traffic through the village of Harley or the village of New Durham that is on its way to the Stubbe concrete factory. And we certainly are happy to have Stubbe's in the county, and we worked hard to get them there. But that's an example of an industry that is not on services that can be located adjacent to infrastructure that supports an operation like that. So if you have the opportunity, if you have the areas designated, things like that can happen, and it creates jobs, it creates assessment, and it is perhaps what we need to be looking at into the future in terms of our official plan. Thank you, Jennifer, for the work you do. It's like playing three-dimensional chess. There are so many variations and factors and ideas and everything. I don't know how you put it all together, and I certainly commend you and the planning staff and the administration for what you're doing. It certainly isn't easy.
Thank you, Councillor Chambers. Councillor Gatward, you're next, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Jennifer. A lot of the lands along the 403 corridor are farmland, connected to farms. I do think the first presentation that we had this evening, even though it's not right on the 403, the transportation links any industry that located on that 80 acres would travel on the 4-lane old 403 to get to the new 403 and through the industrial commercial area of Canesville. So I think, in my mind anyway, there's good potential there for that request. And I guess my question is, it was mentioned it's 3 kilometers to the 403. Is that considered part of the 403 corridor, or is that too far away?
I see do you want Mr. Walton to handle this one? Jennifer?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I probably answer that question, but I think Councillor Gatward is talking about Shelton Papple's property, or in general, Canesville.
Yeah.
I believe she is, yes.
Yes.
Yeah, so that was Eric from GSP who spoke to that.
Yeah, the first presentation.
Right.
Right.
Right. So it's not right on the 403, but it's part of our analysis. So Mr. Papple's conversion from agriculture to employment, which is a settlement area boundary expansion. So that's one of the criteria we're looking at, is the proximity. It's not right on the 403, so it's not considered on the corridor, but it's proximity. But the one issue that we need to clarify about Canesville is the boundary adjustment agreement and servicing about Canesville itself. Is that the fact that the boundary adjustment agreement is only within the confines of the actual current settlement area boundary. But I can get current confirmation from Rob Alton or Michael on this. And also in terms of the ability to service residential lands, the boundary adjustment agreement does not allow for that for Canesville. So in terms of the actual, those are part of the criteria for Mr. Papple's. It's still under review, so that's one of the ones that we're working with. And I talked to Eric quite a bit, and he's been great to work with. So we have a lot of, we just talked the other day. It's just one of the criteria because it's a settlement area boundary expansion. So, but it will remain as rural unserviced lands though with the boundary adjustment agreement.
So does the settlement boundary along Coburn Street East only follow the municipal water line?
Through the mayor to Councillor Gatward. So the current Canesville boundary right now, I'll have to get Rob to jump in, but I know that the water line doesn't go through the whole of Canesville right now.
Yeah,
but if Rob wants to jump in.
I know it goes down Papel Road, but it probably doesn't go across the creek. Thank you.
Mr. Walt.
Yes, that would be good. If Rob.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Gatward. The water main does go to what was the former railway in that area on Papel Road. I think the biggest problem with the requests for change in Canesville here are that our boundary adjustment agreement with the city calls for us to service that at a certain level, which is basically what's designated now. And our servicing strategy as it goes ahead, we've talked of what the requirements for both the lands south of the railway there, which are requested to be changed to residential, and the rest of the lands within Canesville, which can be infill and upgraded. And those amounts that we're talking about with the city will accommodate that. The request from the area outside there to add in is not accommodated in that. And probably the suggestion I would make is it's 30 years ahead of its time. That is something that should be considered when these other lands are developed. And certainly the transportation network that we have within Canesville certainly does allow easy access to the 403, sorry, and we would anticipate that there would be demand for all these lands here once the services are available to be in place. And we're working on the EA right now, and in the next year that'll be finished, and the developers then would be able to work on that, and we'll be working on the plan to extend the water and sewer to other areas in existing Canesville to allow existing parcels to upgrade and take advantage of those services.
So if I might follow up, so I think I was confused about the first part of your answer. As far as the Papel lands are concerned, are you saying that the boundary adjustment agreement does not allow us to provide sewers to that area or to an industry on that 80 acres?
Through the mayor to Councillor Gatward, I do not believe that the lands that are talked about are within the area which would be considered the settlement area of Canesville. Right. And the amount that we're being provided from the city would not allow enough for us to expand that area.
The amount of
water and wastewater.
Okay. And I believe the request from the first delegation was that it be included in the Class EA. Is it too late for that?
No, it's not too late, but our Class EA follows the planning documents which we have. So, you know, we've got to work in concert with this as to, you know, getting to where we need to go by following what we have in place, or what we're doing in tandem, which is looking at the official plan as it's being updated and doing the servicing plan to accommodate what's within that, or we'd never get to the end.
Mm-hmm. It's unfortunate that, you know, I personally think that's a good area for industry, and because of the transportation network, we've got 4-lane highways from Hamilton and the old 403 to the 403 to go either direction. And as Councillor Chambers mentioned, you know, that it's close to the border, and it's the Garden Ave interchange, which has got lots of amenities for transportation trucks, because not a lot seems to be going by rail, but there is some rail in our county, I guess. Anyway, thank you for those answers.
Thank you, Councillor Gatwood. Michael, did you want to speak to Councillor Gatwood before we go to Councillor Bell?
Yeah, Your Worship, I was just going to confirm that the boundary adjustment agreement, it's Schedule E of the boundary adjustment agreement identifies the lands that can be serviced with the city's capacity that they provided, they committed to, and it includes only the existing settlement boundary of Gainesville. And as Mr. Walton, it only contemplates the current uses, so that capacity, and we did a short capacity study as we were preparing the boundary adjustment agreement, and it utilized the existing designation of those lands to determine what capacity the city has.
Thank you, Michael. Councillor Bell, please.
Yeah, thank you. I'll try to make it short, Mr. Mayor, but I wanted to say I fully support what Councillor Chambers proposed. That's exactly the kind of input that I think we as a council should be making. It's that the highest level strategic input around which the staff can then build the plan. I've one more challenge then to, or one more question to Jennifer. She talked about sterilising 395 hectares of excess DGA lands. Could you say how we actually do that? And in the OP, the final OP, will we see a drawing with those specific lands indicated as sterilised?
Jennifer?
Here, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Bell. Absolutely, that information is coming with our municipal comprehensive review in July. You'll see all that information and which lands are actually the excess lands, and we can provide that to you actually right after this meeting for a Friday file. And in terms of land, lays out basically what they are and what you can do with them. And as I mentioned with our meeting with the Ontario Growth Secretariat, we're one of the only Greater Golden Horseshoe municipalities with an excess lands policy, so that are triggering the policy. And they're leaving it up to the municipality. You can do things like down designate, you can sterilize, you can do what Brantford did with the trigger lands. You shade them white as non-developable and for the growth horizon, and then you have a policy set attached to them. So we're looking at different things like that. But basically it means that they're non-developable until the plan horizon to 2051.
Okay, that's very clear. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bell. Are there any other questions to the planner? Seeing none, thank you for all your hard work. You were almost on your own tonight. We got to see Brandon once, and Russell got off the hook. So I see that he's still with us, but thank you for staying up so late, Russell and Brandon. Moving forward, the next thing I need to do is I need to find someone to make a motion. I have a motion moved by Councillor Councillor Howes and seconded by Councillor LaFerriere to bring forward the proposal as it's written, I'm sorry. Do you want to read it, Councillor Howes? You want Heather to read it?
I can read it if you like.
Okay.
I move, and Mark, Councillor LaFerriere seconds, that the report be received as information and that staff be directed to prepare a draft municipal comprehensive review and new official plan based on the preliminary policy directions outlined in attachment 4 of report RPT 21-151, subject to and in consideration of the input from council, the public, and stakeholders received through the public engagement noted above.
Thank you. Everyone's clear on what we're voting on. The clerk obviously has noted that Councillor Wheat, I think Councillor Coleman aren't with us anymore. So just for the numbers for the vote, we're missing 2. Any other questions? Seeing none, we'll call the vote. All those in favor? Is there anyone opposed? Seeing nobody opposed, it's a very clear direction, I think, for staff to carry on. I think you've done a great job, and all we can do is what we think is best. So I think a lot of our best thoughts are going to be put on paper. So thank you very much. Councillor Chambers?
Mr. Mayor, could I make one correction that I said that was quite incorrect? I said that in 35 years I was going to be 105. Well, I vastly overstated that, and if anybody did the math, it's not quite that accurate.
There you go.
Actually 107.
Yeah. Councillor Bell, did you have anything to add? No? Everybody's good? There's no other questions, concerns? No? Seeing, I'm going to ask for a motion to adjourn, although I know I can do it myself. Councillor Pierce, we stand adjourned. The next meeting will be call of the chair and/or call of the committee. So thank you very much.
Have a fantastic night, folks.
Stay well and stay safe.